basically that's based initially around the Holocaust, right?
Yeah, that's how the concept came up. First of all, thanks for having me. I appreciate it very much. It's fun to be here. I started a podcast at the very height of the pandemic. So to backtrack for a second, we can go back and talk about some news stuff, but started in news back in 96, so I'm dating myself right now, and ended my career as a national correspondent at Fox News Channel, and left there in 2018. I love the news business, but I had 3 little kids, and I have a wife, and that was not a good combination. I was on the road like 3 weeks out of every month, and the wife was like, it's not going to happen if I'm your wife. So I love you, Ileana, but I had to find a new way. So left the news business, started a media company, and that really took off, was doing well. And then the good old pandemic struck. 2020, we had just moved to Miami as a news couple. My wife was also in the news business. We jumped around a lot. So we went from New York to D.C. to L.A., down to Miami finally. So settled down, pandemic strikes, the business comes to a screeching halt. That's never fun. I'm at home with 3 kids, never been home. Suddenly I'm, Mr. Mom.
Still got your hair.
Yeah, barely. And so I really moved down because my parents are getting, significantly older. My dad just turned 89, thank God. And my mom is 83. And at the time, my mom's a firecracker with a ton of energy. She's a Holocaust survivor, as you mentioned, and she's got a lot of wisdom to impart. So I was bored out of my mind and said, hey, let's do a podcast. And we've tossed around ideas before, but, they never really went anywhere. But for some reason, this just clicked. I came up with the name Surviving the Survivor because obviously my mom is a survivor. And she busts balls. Am I allowed to say that? I can say that, yeah.
Say whatever the fuck you want. Yeah.
So she definitely busts my balls. Love her to death, but she's a tough woman and a character. So came up with the title Surviving the Survivor, and the tagline, which was perfect for the pandemic, is Surviving in a Rough World, which is a slogan my mom used to kind of she has a million phrases. And when we were kids, she would always say jokingly, I'm just trying to survive in a rough world. So no better time to institute that than during the pandemic. So it became Surviving the Survivor, Surviving in a Rough World. I knew I needed a real star to make the show happen, and reacquainted with Steve Cohen, the god of booking producers, who is in the studio with us here.
Would that be the guy sitting over there?
Yeah, that is the handsome fella in the corner, the handsome, eligible bachelor in the corner. So we...
Girls, he's available.
He is. When he rolls that sleeve up, it means he's getting the business. It's half rolled up right now. He wants to get on this mic so bad, I know. So... long story short, I teamed up with Steve, and Steve is, in all seriousness, kind of known as the producer, the booking producer in New York network news. So he started getting us really prominent guests. Carol Baskin, while Tiger King was really hot, he got us this guy, Dr. Avi Loeb, who's a Harvard astrophysicist they're making a movie about right now, who believes he saw alien life. And we just started doing kind of like what you're doing here, sort of Joe Rogan-esque style. And then things morphed a little bit into true crime. We tripped across a really interesting story about a professor who went to Harvard undergrad, Harvard law school, and was eventually found himself in a bad marriage, got divorced, and was then murdered in 2014. We can get more into that. And so we've kind of pivoted quite a bit into true crime, and right now we're really covering that case, the Dan Markel case, and now this crazy story out of Idaho with these 4 murdered 21 and 20-year-olds, the 3 girls and a young man. So, it's crazy, but the podcast is doing really well all of a sudden. We're psyched, not doing as well as you, but we're trying to get there. I joke with everyone, I'm chasing Rogan, so...
I think we're all chasing Rogan.
Rogan's listening right now. I'm coming for you, Joe. Better keep lifting those weights. So anyway, I rambled on quite a bit.
No, and this is your podcast. And so what do you think? Can you scroll down a little bit, Rob? What do you think about the Idaho case? We had Baz Baselin, he's a CIA guy.
Uh-huh.
We wanted his take. What's your take? So there was 4 people that got stabbed, but 2 didn't. And they didn't hear 4 people getting stabbed? And remember, Baz was like, well, you could put the call, there's ways to do it. Yeah. But, I mean, I don't know that.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So by the time this airs, it will have been, if it goes unsolved, it will be over 4 weeks that no one's been caught. There has not been a killer named or a suspect sought or a murder weapon. And it's kind of unusual because this happened in a small town in Idaho where the University of Idaho is. It looks like Moscow, Russia, but it's pronounced Moscow, and they get offended if you say Moscow, so make sure you're saying Moscow. And there's another college 8 miles away, which is a huge university, Washington State University. So you've got these 2 big universities, within 8 miles of each other. These 2 women, Kaylee Gonzalez and Maddie Mogan, they're best friends. They go out for a night to the happening little bar in town. They're out till 1:45 in the morning. And then the other pair, it's a boyfriend and girlfriend, they're out till right around the same time, 1:45 in the morning. They come home separately at the same time, and they've got 2 other people who are in the home, roommates who are sleeping in the basement. It's sure you guys have seen the photo, but it's a weird-shaped house. And I've had people on the podcast, a woman, Gemma Gaudette, who hosts a show in Boise, Idaho. Well, her husband lived in that very house 25 years ago, and they've actually, she said they've, built it up. So it's kind of like 3 homes in one almost. So the details are really sketchy, and the police information, as a former reporter, it was super confusing to me, and I know it was really confusing to the public, but basically they came out initially and said, hey, we think this was a targeted attack. First they said they thought it was random. Then they said it was targeted. And so this word targeted really got played up in the media, and the meaning, what does it mean to be a targeted attack? And it took a lot of different forms. And then the police came back out and said it was not targeted, and came back out again and said it was targeted. And it's just gone back and forth for weeks.
Yeah, now they were both targeted. 2 of the people were targeted, and then the timeline thing. That gap in the timeline was the big problem, right? Yeah,
there's a gap in the timeline. That's one of the issues. But it was really the kind of the missteps on the part of the local police department. Keep in mind, this is a town of just 26,000 people in Idaho, so they're not, we're not talking about the NYPD here, obviously. And they're
not used to this kind of stuff, right?
No, 100%. And I heard a NYPD detective being interviewed, and he said, look, we're not used to quadruple homicides at the NYPD. It's very uncommon, right? And but there's so much that goes into it. And look, I'm a huge Dateline fan. It's interesting. I never knew I wanted to be a journalist, right? But I wrote for my high school newspaper. We had a high school radio station. Then I wrote for the college paper. I didn't think I could make a living, but it kind of evolved. And I'm realizing the podcast world kind of just did it because the world is podcasting right now. But my interest, I'm very interested in all of this. Good old Steve-O Cohen here is fascinated with the Dan Markel case, which is how we kind of got into it a little bit. And I've really gotten into the University of Idaho story.
Sorry, who's our guy that's going to drive me nuts? Who's our guy that we always like from Dateline or ID?
Oh, the old guy.
Keith Morrison?
Keith Morrison.
Oh, he's the best.
I'm sorry, I was going to drive.
He
can tell a story.
He's your grandfather. When you sit on your grandfather's lap and he reads you a bedtime story,
he's the sexiest man alive.
He's
Matthew Perry's stepfather.
Is he
from
really?
Friends. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Cohen, how come you haven't booked Keith Morrison and Josh Mankiewicz yet? What's the matter with you?
Chris Hansen.
Yeah, Chris Hansen.
Steve Cohen, there's a lot of pressure on you after this podcast. They're sponsored by Monster. You got a lot of work to do, man. I'm sponsored by my mother right now. My mother sponsors me. I'm a 53-year-old man sponsored by my mother. We got to get on the ball.
This one.
Yeah,
I'm staying out of this.
Yeah. But back to the case. So I'm really fascinated by it. And we had this guy on last week, who I actually used to interview all the time, and good old Steve-O here reintroduced me to him. His name is Jonathan Gillum. If you haven't had him on your show, I'm going to make it happen. He is a former Navy SEAL. Like, once a Navy SEAL, always a Navy SEAL, so I don't even know if it's correct to say former. Do you know?
This podcast is brought to you by Monster Energy. Tear into a can of the meanest energy drink on the planet, Monster Energy. It's the ideal combo of the right ingredients in the right proportion to deliver a big bad buzz that only Monster can. Monster packs a powerful punch, has a smooth, easy drinking flavor. Athletes, musicians, co-eds, road warriors, metalheads, geeks, hipsters, and bikers dig it. You will too. Monster Energy is more than just the green OG. Monster has Monster Ultra, Juice Monster, Monster Hydro, Rehab Monster, Dragon Tea, Monster Max, Muscle Monster, and many more. Buy on Amazon, buy on Walmart, or go to monsterenergy.com and believe me, you'll find a place. Unleash the beast. Monster Energy.
He believes that her father, there's something interesting about her father, and he is very suspect. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he came on the podcast and he said, look, people do a lot of like crazy things in this world, and unfortunately family members kill family members. He's not saying that it was him per se, but he's saying that his behavior post-murder is very odd, to say the least. So that kind of illuminated my eyes a bit, and I started looking at it much differently. But there are a bunch of suspects out there that people are, not named suspects, not by the police, but cyber sleuths. There's this guy that they always talk about in the white hoodie, and he's seen that night, like next to a food truck, looking at the young women at Kaylee and Maddie, and like staring at them and giving them strange looks. A lot of people are like, this is the guy. And apparently he took off that morning and went home, which was like 5 hours away. And then people on social media, which is a difficult time to live in because you don't know what's true, what's real information, what's misinformation, but they say that he's now in Africa. I've seen that from a bunch of people. Who knows if that's true or not? But obviously, in this day and age, everyone's got a cell phone. Everyone's got an opinion. Everyone has Twitter. A lot of people have podcasts. So there's a lot out there. One of the ways I try to differentiate myself is by using my news chops as a former correspondent. And I really host the show. I bring the experts on. So they're not my opinions, but the people, who I have on. Because I do take some crap from, trolls and other people. And just people who are expressing their opinions, as I'm sure you do, online. But I'm not really taking a side, or conjecturing myself, but bringing the people on who are doing that, just to try to keep the story alive and bring some light to it. So that's what we're doing, and I think this story is gripping the nation. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And if you want to see what the Navy SEAL said, check out the channel, right?
Check it out. It's Surviving the Survivor on YouTube and anywhere you listen to podcasts.
I think, I'll tell you, I think the dad, I'm with him just because of the body language. The body language was so weird from the beginning, and it's odd to me. You've been in the news forever, and you, and especially you.
Yeah, Steve.
Steve, sorry to just say you. to a legend over here. Great job, Tom.
Yeah.
But, usually don't they go to the father first, kind of really interrogate him? It seemed like they didn't really mess with him. And then his body language and his eyes and his... Yeah, I'm not saying it, because I would hate to be...
It would be hard, you got to assume that the guy didn't do it, right? So then to point a finger at him it's bordering, I would say, on irresponsible. But what I told the audience last night, because it jolted me when I had Jonathan on, and he said this, but he's coming from an investigative standpoint. That's what he was trained in. So he's looking at body language. He's looking at, eye contact, and
he never makes eye contact.
And
he's always looking away, and he's going like this. And then he remember he got so upset because I guess his PI had told him, he got a private investigator that told him something, and he wanted to go off, and the wife was like, calm down.
Yeah.
it just seems.
You know the story. You're up on it. I mean,
I'm curious.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a shame.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, it really is. So, yeah, I mean, so he's looking at this as an investigator. You know, I come to the podcasts really prepared. So I had pulled quotes from the father, right? And he brought this up, and I said, I happen to have, a quote. And it was a long quote. You know, it was like, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines. And I read it out loud on the podcast. And again, we had this woman who's excellent. Her name is Gemma Gaudette. She hosts a show called Idaho Matters on public radio out there. So she knows the local area really well. And but anyway, I read the quote from Gonzalez's father, this guy Steve, and Jonathan, the former FBI special agent and who was trained as a Navy SEAL, he's like, you know what you just read, right? And I'm like, no. He's like, you just read the movements of the killer. And when I went back, because it talked about the dad is saying the person must have gone in through the slider, went upstairs, then went downstairs, went upstairs. And it's so crazy because I wasn't even remotely thinking that. But when he pointed that out, it suddenly made a lot of sense. Again, I am in no way saying that the father is responsible. It'd be horribly tragic and sad if that turned out to be the case, but could just be a random killer, But it's a weird case, man. I could talk about it all day.
Don't you think it has to be somebody within?
Yeah, because there's no screams. That was another thing. There's 4 roommates that are basically butchered to death and 2 other people in the house, and no one hears anything.
Were they drugged up at all? Did they ever say that? Did they, passed out, drugged up? That maybe that's why, or no?
There have been no toxicology reports released because I brought that up, and my great mom, who's a smart woman, right away was like, maybe they were roofied. She was like, maybe they were roofied, and so they couldn't respond, like whoever did this at a bar. But I mean, you could go a million different ways. But college kids, I mean, they can get wasted and smoke weed and just pass out, right? But the thing that the SEAL that Jonathan was telling me is it's so easy to, like, you stab someone and you get them like near the windpipe and you can't talk, and it doesn't take a lot. You could incapacitate someone in a matter of seconds, and it could have happened really quickly. With that said, he got a little graphic because he's like, I've been trained to kill, and I'm sure he has because he's done some crazy things.
Yeah, he has, but not the
No.
dad.
I'm saying that Jonathan, the SEAL.
I think it's either got to be the dad or the 2 other people. Who else could it be? I personally don't see it being some guy in a van that just runs to Africa. You know what I mean? Sure, that stuff happens, but if I was a betting man, which I don't bet, but if I did, well, sports, like you. But who would you put your money on? What do you think?
I don't know. I always thought I haven't followed as closely probably as you guys, but I thought some sort of like love triangle or something going on there, and some lover out there that is mad, and I don't know.
Well, they a lot of people are pointing the finger at the on again, off again boyfriend who there were like 9 calls back and forth with the night of the murder. They say that that the family is like, there's no way he did it. We stand by him 1,000%. And then there's a guy in the white hoodie. That guy apparently had, who was outside the food truck. That guy apparently got kicked out of school. He had behavioral issues. And there's some weird, that's the guy who took off to his home 5 hours away. So who knows? I mean, it's a kind of story that you can guess and second guess and speculate on a lot, which
because they're not releasing anything, so all you have is little bits and pieces to try to grab and come up with some type of conclusion that probably is completely inaccurate because we don't know any facts about anything. Yeah,
I try to stay true to my journalism roots, but I'll be honest, it's really hard because you're a host and you're bringing on people who are speculating, and you kind of get sucked into it. But at the end of the day, I say this on the podcast, it turns into who done it, and into becomes
dark hole. It sounds like a dark hole.
Yeah,
a dark hole that you get trapped
but
in
it
really
becomes
quick.
It becomes this murder mystery, and so you begin to forget that they're real humans, which is a real sad part. So I try to read the victims' names at the beginning of every show to remember them, but Yeah, it's a tragedy, but it's also a wild, like, whodunit story.
Well, you brought up to a good point. You worked as a television reporter, and when you're out on the scene of a murder or a fire or anything like that, you're going by the information that you're getting from the police.
Mm-hmm.
So they're telling you, we have 2 dead, gunshot wound, whatever. You get on air, right? You report, according to police, 2 people were shot and killed, stabbed, whatever. And then you're interviewing people, and you're making the public make an assumption, basically. You interview this guy, go, he's guilty or he's not guilty. You're not saying it.
Mm-hmm.
But now you go to this, there's so much information out there that in podcasts and all this other stuff, that's where it's hard anymore with the news, where it just gets like talk shows and real news and what's real, what's fake, what's not.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason there's kind of a vitriol for the mainstream media. There's also a reason that newsrooms are struggling, and that's because we've all got one of these, a cell phone, and the media has really been democratized. It's so crazy because I'm 53, right? So I grew up. I didn't even have a computer, I don't think, in 8th grade, or I had to take a language called Pascal, which no one's ever heard of.
What is Pascal?
It's some ancient computer language that I cheated
never
off
heard
of
of it.
Steve Isaacoff, God bless him. In Mr. Jern's class, that's how I passed, thanks to Steve Isaacoff, who went on to Princeton and Harvard, and slightly smarter than me. Like the evolution of technology is insane. It's actually one of the things I grapple with the most in life. My wife is younger. I won't say how much younger, but about a decade younger. And she one-man banded in Yakima, Washington. That was her first TV news job. She can edit. I can't edit. She can do everything. But today, literally, I have a 6-year-old daughter that wants to start a YouTube channel. She'll have more subscribers than me probably in a year, and she knows how to get on. She knows how to edit videos. My point is that the media has been completely democratized. It used to be 3 channels. Like, you used to tune into CBS, NBC, or ABC. Now you've got 2 million podcasters. Granted, only 5% of them actually podcast more than 4 times or whatever.
But then you have news anchors like Tucker and the other ones that they go off within like a Fox Nation, and they'll do an hour one-on-one on the side.
Yeah.
So that's how they combat
good old
their,
Tucker Carlson. I used to
their 3-second. So hey, this episode is brought to you by Let's Get Checked. Are you the man your father was? Recent studies have shown that men's testosterone levels have dropped substantially since the 1980s at about an average of 1% per year. Think about how old your father was when he was born. For example, if he was 30, your testosterone levels could be 30% lower than his. Low testosterone levels can have all type of health effects on men. It can affect your mood, sex drive, memory, muscle mass loss, you name it. And yes, low testosterone is more common the older you get, but it can affect men at any age. So let's talk about today's sponsor, Let's Get Checked. You can order a testing kit that will be delivered to you in a discreet packaging with next-day delivery. Once your sample arrives in the laboratory, confidential results will be available from your secure online account within 2 to 5 days. So, if you want to test your hormone levels without having to leave your home, visit trylgc.com/MSCS Media and get 25% off your test using the code MSCS Media. The link is in the description at the top. This episode is sponsored by Aurora. Do you know what the fastest growing crime in America is? For years, this crime rate has been surging and affecting millions of Americans. I'm talking about identity theft, and there's a new victim every 14 seconds. Yet despite this, those who have had their identity stolen are often shocked when it happens. That's why I'm excited to partner with Aurora, who is sponsoring this video. Aurora is identity theft protection, fraud monitoring, a VPN, password management, and antivirus software all into one easy-to-use app. Their VPN allows you to stay anonymous online by keeping your browsing history and personal information safe and encrypted. Protect you and your family from America's fastest growing crime. Try Aurora for free for 2 weeks and see if you or anyone in your family's personal information has been compromised. Start your free trial today. Go to aurora.com/MSCS. The link is in the description below.
When I'm writing a news story, and I got back into the business temporarily because it's as you were saying, it's a really small world, and the Surfside building collapse happened right when I kind of moved back, and I have a mutual friend. So that morning at like 5 a.m, my phone starts ringing off the hook. The news director's like, I know I've never seen you on air, but can you come work for us? And I was like, sure. And it was supposed to be a 2-week thing that ended up being like 14 or 15 months.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but it's a small world. But so I was back to writing news stories, and I was thinking about it. Like I never like a soundbite in a news story to be more than 10 seconds because you have a minute and 30 seconds to tell a story, basically. So if you think about that, 10 seconds is not a lot of time. Joe Rogan interviews a guest for 3 hours. So, again, this is all part of like the new ecosystem for the media, like the whole new world, and this is why things are changing. Yeah, and this is why I think people are attracted. God, I'm terrified because I'm going to go back and read these comments about this guy basically accusing the father, and I'm going to get butchered. But anyway.
Don't read the comments.
Yeah.
That's why they're off.
Yeah.
Don't read them. It will change it. No, I turn them all off.
You do?
One, because, later in life, say you want, a big-time athlete or somebody who's really out there in the public, and you got some troll saying this and that. Yeah. Well, these big-time guys have endorsement agents, and they're getting 20% of whatever endorsement they have. And if you got people talking all kinds of crazy in your comments, if I'm say Tom Brady's agent, and I'm gonna go look at having my Tom Brady that I get all his endorsements going on a podcast, I'm gonna look and see where he's going, and if I see he's walking into fire, Tom, you're not going to that one, buddy. I want my 20% on all those endorsements. By the way, Rob, did you see Tom Brady on Monday Night Football?
I watched the end of it last night when I left here.
Yeah, you're not too happy about that, are you?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. You hear this, Steve-O? We got to turn off the comment section. So Steve's always working. Who are you? Are you emailing Kanye right now from me? Have you booked him yet or what? I'm trying to get Kanye. Kanye, if you're listening, I want him to meet my mother, the Holocaust survivor. Have the two of them have a conversation.
It's a good pitch, especially right now.
It'd be awesome.
I saw you had Mark Aragos on.
Yeah, that's thanks to Steve Cohen. Everything's thanks to Steve Cohen.
Yeah, I know Mark Aragos.
Do you?
Oh, yeah, I know Mark. What's with his shoes? Scroll down one.
He was talking about his shoes.
Tell me what he said about his shoes.
He said
I gotta know.
He said that the way he became a celebrity attorney was his two-tone brown shoes. Someone noticed them.
The Gucci ones?
Yeah, must be.
You must tell that story 1,000 times.
Have you had him on?
No, I've hired him about 12 years ago. I had to hire him.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was good.
Really?
He handled things quick.
I don't want to ask too much about this, but I'm interested.
No, it was nothing crazy, but it was just, you had to have Mark Aragos,
Really?
But yeah, he was good, though. He was good.
So let me ask you, what got you interested in podcasting? Because you don't come from, like, a media background.
Oddly enough, I was watching Rogan, Dan Pena a lot. Brian Cox, because I'm really into like space and space-time continuum and all that other stuff. And then Matt Cox does a lot of true crime. I ran into him, and his buddy was going to do a movie called Bent, and it was like credit card. They were making cards. And Matt was like, I do this podcast, this true crime thing. And I thought, all right, well, maybe that'd be different. So like the first maybe month, it was just to have fun. I had my barber in. I didn't even know Rob. I had my barber and anybody I knew just to sit with. And everybody would tell me, short length works, this, that, the other, something on 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And then I enjoyed it. I just enjoyed getting away from all like the computer work I was doing and the marketing and this was like a therapy way.
Yeah.
And then over time I really liked it. And then more friends and then more popular friends that did things, and then, you get one NFL guy, then you can get another one. You get one doctor that's big, then you can get another one. And then it just grew over time. Yeah,
it's all about networking, right, Steve-O? Steve-O, what's the secret? Steve always says, repeat customers are our best customers. Correct, Steve-O? It's
very nice of you to include me in this.
You're not Mike, so don't say too much, but I'll translate for you.
I also feel like it's like this. Like I've done it for a while, obviously. Some of it is
By the way, what Steve is about to give you is worth like $100 million. You're about to get the secret. Go ahead, Steve.
No, I feel like it's like how do you get people to a party, right? You invite them early, you invite them often, you tell them who else is going to be at the party. You be a good host, you give them parting gifts. Yeah, then it's rinse, repeat, reheat. But persistence beats resistance.
Steve is a very well-educated schmoozer. That's what he is. He can talk to anyone and everyone. He even flirted with your lovely receptionist downstairs. He told her that he wanted a Zima, which I forgot existed.
Zimas.
Zimas. Remember Zimas?
Yeah,
I forgot that existed.
Oh, my God.
Who remembers
you wanna
that?
Sit in?
No, thank you. I mean, it's very nice of you.
I don't care. Okay.
No, but I feel like he's the headliner. Like, I mean, he's,
Steve, you can get in here. It's fine with me.
It's very
All right. If you change your mind,
It'll go off the rails with
I
Steve.
feel like
It'll go off the rails with him. But
this,
yeah.
it's really great.
But it's good that you have Rob, man. He's a great addition because he's like, he's listening and he's like the ears in the corner and he's.
Try to add to it.
Comfortable? Did you tell him? Did you guys develop?
Steve, you're going to keep talking. You got to get on the
You're
mic.
gonna keep talking. You got to get in. It's A or B. A or B. A or B.
Get in.
All right, Steve. Well, you decided to come on here after 15 minutes. You should have just came on from the beginning.
After your voice echoing, the din of your voice, this podcast is about to go off the rails.
Yeah, exactly. My plan worked. My evil plan.
Steve, what is your secret to booking phenomenal guests? Share your secret with the world.
Can
for
I
free.
ask him?
Yeah, absolutely.
Steve, can you tell us your background and why you're a legend?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm certainly not a legend, obviously, but I feel I started out in let's go way back when I was 5 years old. I went to nursery school.
And then toy cars. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like
What was your
Matchbox
favorite
cars.
toy?
Yeah,
Was He-Man around back then? Mine was He-Man.
G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe. I had G.I. Joe too.
Yeah. No, I do remember, like Eddie Murphy talks about G.I. Joe with a kung fu grip, but I wasn't really into that kind of stuff. I did like sports growing up, but I started in college. I worked for the student newspaper I went to a big college, University of Michigan, and I was one of the editors of the school paper.
Big Blue.
And then I enjoyed it. And then I think afterwards, a lot of my friends from the school newspaper, which was really a great place to be, and they're really, to this day, so many accomplished people who worked with us at the Michigan Daily, and 30 some odd years later, it's a great community of people and great friends. But I think at the time, I liked it in college. It was great. It was able to make such a big college feel smaller and more, accommodating and intimate. And it's a great group of people that I'm close to this day. But I felt like I liked the immediacy of radio and television. So from college, I worked at I went to the WCBS Radio, and then I went from local radio to national radio. Then I worked at the CBS Early Show for 10 years. And I worked at Good Day New York, where I overlapped with Joel for like a week. And best week
That's
of my
all it
life.
took. That's
yeah,
all it took.
exactly. And then after I spent 5 years at Good Day New York. I enjoyed every place I worked, and I've always felt that successful people focus on the flowers, not the weeds, and you have to just make the most of wherever you are. And so at all of these places, I think I have been very effective at getting guests. I always felt like getting guests is always it's about work, and you have to enjoy it, and you have to have a sense of curiosity. But I think it's always about contacts and association, whatever the story is. So it could be a story like the Idaho one with Joel, and it could be, well, all right, you're going to need former FBI agents. You might need profilers. You may need detectives. And then you have a retinue of people that you're ready to go to, and you're able to apply them, and I think you always have people's trust and attention for so long. And I think that I've always felt like in booking people, persistence beats resistance. I feel like, it's kind of like getting people to a party, and it's kind of like, how do you get people to a party? You invite them often, you invite them early, you be a good host, you tell them who else is at the party, you give them party favors, a lot of the things you do. And I think that you try and think of them. It's not about your ego, it's about their ego. And you figure out the psychology of why would they want to come on. Some people want to come on because they're selling something. Some people want to come on because they just enjoy speaking to you intellectually. Some people want to come on because they really enjoy the topic. Like they love this topic. And you see that now in the podcast space, where they're niche-oriented shows. And like I was telling young Joel and his mom, who the real star of the show, Carmela Waldman, that now focus sometimes yields broad results. And so, or niches lead to riches. But some of these shows that you see, yeah, I like whatever shows I might like. I might like The Wire, or I liked Us, and then you'll get into it, and you'll really be interested in it, and you're going to want to talk about it because you really enjoy it. There's no friction, and you're able to do it. And I think we are seeing that with some of the stories that we're drawing that brings attention to our podcast. And it's been amazing. I really enjoy working with Joel and Carmela. He's incredible. He works really, really hard. I feel like I'd rather tame a wild horse than motivate a mule. And he works really hard. I mean, he puts his time in and his energy in. He pays attention to detail. And so it's kind of like you and Rob here. You have a very good synergy, and
Thank you.
kind of, yeah. And I think you're doing the little things, the details separate the great. And that's why Green-Eyed Monster here is just jealous, and of your success and here. And I feel like I've told Joel a lot this. I think we both kind of, I've told him more than once that he needs a checkup from the neck up, and that we're doing well. And like, comparison's a thief of joy. Just focus on what you're doing.
If you haven't noticed, Steve uses quite a few.
I do.
I'm writing a book called Cohenism. I'm writing a book about my mom, actually, about her wisdom for the world. Kind of. There's an old book called Tuesdays with Maury. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
By Mitch Albom. It's kind of. It was actually he went to the same college as me up in Boston, Brandeis University. And his professor was dying, and he loved his professor, so he wrote a book called Tuesday. Every Tuesday, he'd go meet with his professor. This is a true story, and he would write down what the professor told him was important in life. And I'm kind of doing something similar with my mom, but after that, I'm writing Cohenism.
It's funny because and I feel like one of the things that I really do like with Carmela and Joel is like, it is what you see is what you get. I think they're authentic. And after the show, sometimes they'll call me and
yelling.
And they'll be yelling, but it's also
at each other, not at you.
And so, yeah, and she's very blunt. And I'll say, listen, you guys could do better.
You know what this reminds me of?
Yeah.
Is we had Teddy Atlas on.
Yeah.
Because the Amato was his guy.
Yeah,
and you two remind me of how Teddy described the relationship with Cuz.
Interesting.
Because right from the gate, they were very close, and even though they had their issues at times, they had made up and well. And right from the beginning, he'd be like, Cuz would say something to him, and Teddy would be like, Cuz, don't start with me with that philosophy shit now. Don't start. I've already heard it 100 times. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, the stories were just...
They're both remarkable people. Yeah.
And I see that here. I see it.
I think it was funny because, like the other day, I was
We're the Jewish version. We go out to dinner the other night. Waitress comes up, and he goes... There's no swine in my dine and no pork on my fork. This is in Miami. The waitress starts cracking up. I was like, what did you say?
See, now, the Jewish community should thank Kanye because everybody wanted to kill him when he kept saying Jewish on Lex Friedman.
The Jews was trending on Twitter.
Talking about the Jew.
Now, I actually want to start a separate podcast with Cohen, but he's... I don't know if he's lazy or just.
Well, we used to say that. We used to say that in TV. I'm sure you guys know this. Like, we would have like interns or whatever, and they'd be like dumb or lazy, because you would see them and you'd just be like.
Do you remember that, Rob?
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like it's.
Now, Steve, coming up. You got so good at booking, right? Yeah. And when is the right time to ask? Because you're at a higher level in your career, you've made it.
Yeah.
To prominent status. When you go to get a guest, they don't want to be bothered, or I should say as you're growing, right? They don't want to be bothered with, hey, do you want to come on the show? Hey, can you do this? When is the right time to ask someone like
that's
that?
A good question. I mean, I always felt very confident, even back when I was in radio. And I think, I think it's competitive, but I think I've always felt like it didn't matter where I was. When I was at CBS Radio, I felt like I was very effective. And I felt like you bring yourself wherever you go.
I mean, like, Steve, do you go to a party and buy a bottle of champagne and walk away and leave and just leave a note from Steve? And then next time you go to the same place?
No. And I'll tell you, it's very interesting that you should say that, because I think Patrick Bet-David's really successful. And I was like reading his book, and he talked about how he has people come up to him and they say, wow, you're really amazing. If you ever need somebody, let me know. And he said, well, would you go to a bar and see a beautiful woman and say, wow, you're so amazingly beautiful. I'd love to go out with you sometime. I'll call you in a couple of months. No. I mean, I think there's a lot of different situations, and you could see, you know, like, you have to gauge the situation. You know, fortune favors the bold. I've been in a lot of different situations, and I feel like you have to be authentic. You have to be genuine. You know, I think.
But you always say persistence beats resistance. So I think the key, especially if you're a young podcaster. Look, I'm now quoting Steve. He's like,
no, I just mean in general.
Yeah, like no, but I think I mean, to answer your question, I think that there is no right time and no wrong time. I think that you just have to hustle. Like, that's it at the end of the day. And if you want someone, you just got to go out and get them. Like, for example, right now with the Idaho killings, I drove up here with Steve today, and I said I really want to get Mark Furman, the detective from the OJ case, because I think he lives in Idaho too. He either lives in Idaho or Montana. So, Steve, you better get on that, because.
Well, I was like one step ahead of you, but I also feel like it's. But I'll give you an example. You asked me about the right time, and I remember.
What I mean is not now. Yeah. I mean when you're. It's just real, like, because a lot of people coming up, they don't know when. I didn't know when. Yeah. You know, that's why I stay away from it.
Oh, interesting.
So what I'm saying is, when you were coming up.
Yeah.
How did you know when the right time to ask was somebody that doesn't want to be bothered?
Oh, okay. And I've been in those situations. I mean, I remember in 2003 even, and I was in TV, and it was the second Gulf War, and I was in Baltimore, and the first Marine, you know, was killed in Iraq, and his dad was really, you know, went out and was really in his grief, he talked about, you know, it was Bush's fight, you know, and he said stuff, and I remember going there, and I remember speaking to one of the anchors, and I was like, Steve, the guy just lost his son. I'm not calling him, because that used to be kind of the situation the anchors would call, or you would induce to some people, and some things just aren't worth it, you know, if that's what success is. And, you know, but some people do want to talk, and some people do want to. I watched in the Idaho case, these parents wanted to remember their kids. They found it therapeutic, some people. And so I think you have to be humanistic. And I think, I remember one time when the Heidi Fleiss story came, I was early in my career, and there was this woman known as the Mayflower Madam, and Sidney Biddle Barrows, and everybody wanted to call her because she had been used to procuring escorts and doing those kind of things. And I called her, and she said, Steve, you know, I feel like I'm trying to turn over a new leaf, you know. And I said, turn over a new leaf tomorrow, do our show today. And it didn't work. But I think sometimes if you say things with humor, like his hero, Dr. Ruth Westheimer, used to say, a lesson taught with humor is a lesson learned. But I think you try and have a sense of humor, you try and be yourself, and you try and be authentic, and you try and see things for their perspective. And I do try and see things like, here's why you should do it. If I say it for my benefit, I'm manipulating.
You're dead.
Yeah. You know, and I'm just not like that. And I think I have a good reputation. But even then, I had a degree of confidence. I remember when I started at the CBS Early Show right after 9/11, and people were like, do you think you can get this person? And I said, well, if I tell them it's Easter, they'll start hunting for eggs. Yeah. I feel like I could do it.
Another Cohen.
I always feel like I could do it. You know, I do. But
well, he's curious, and he's a schmoozer by nature. And he's smart. So he combines those three. I'm going to write a book about you, Steve.
That's very nice. Thank you.
No, but
but it was funny because we were with his mom, Carmela, who's tough. And I was like, listen, you know, you don't grade your own papers. You could do better. God bless you, you know. And I said, we don't need to have the soft bigotry of low expectation. And she was like, screw you. And I said, what's the biggest room in the world? The room for improvement, you know. And then But it's a great relationship. I'm thrilled to be working with him. His mom's amazing. And then the other day we were talking because they were on Court TV, and I was so happy for them that they're starting to get the exposure they deserve. And so I said to them, listen, one day a peacock, the next day a feather duster. And they were like, well, who thinks like this? Who talks like this? I was like, I talk like this.
But I think it's, it's like I was saying, the media has really become democratized, and everyone has a shot now, which is like super cool. I mean, someone with quote unquote no experience can just start a podcast, and it could really be elevated, go viral, and that person. I mean, look, Joe Rogan.
Viral though.
Yeah, Joe Rogan was not trained.
Viral is what they want to go viral.
Correct.
Yeah.
But look, Rogan is a stand-up comic, and his background, he was an actor, but he wasn't like this talk show host, and that's what he's become, like the most important voice in America. Mm-hmm. He wasn't a Larry King. He wasn't like on radio for years. So anyone's got the opportunity. And what's interesting about Rogan, which I was just listening to today, he said a lot of celebrities are, they contact him all the time who want to come on, and he just wants to talk to people who are interesting. Which there's this reporter who Steve knows and I know named Steve Hartman at CBS.
Oh, he's the best.
Yeah, the best.
On the road.
And so, there was one point in his career where he was taking a dart and throwing it at a phone book, and wherever it landed, he'd go do a story on that person. The point being, everyone's got an interesting story to tell. But it got a little off topic, but to answer your question about when's the right time, I think you just kind of like, in this day and age, you just have to, whoever you want to talk to, you have to at least ask. They can always say no, but you've got to ask, and try to get the guests that you want to get for your show. You'll be surprised.
That's what I was going to say. My dad always says, if you don't ask, you won't know.
Yeah.
So the worst they can say is, go fuck yourself.
That's
No.
what Sylvester Stallone just said in the. You still haven't watched that? The
I have
Tulsa
not
King.
watched Tulsa.
Have you watched
Oh.
the Tulsa King?
No,
watched it
not
yet.
yet.
It's
no.
good. It's
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. I want to check it out.
But,
guy
What's it
asked me-
on?
It's on Paramount.
Paramount.
On Paramount,
You
yeah.
have to buy it.
One thing that you guys are talking about, Steve and Joel, coming from a news background too, the worst was I was out in the field, and so were you, Joel, and you'd have to go up to someone who just their child was murdered. And back there they'd say, all right, get us the soundbite, get us the soundbite, get us the soundbite. And I'd be like, this is a mom who just lost her son. I'm not going to go up there. And this was just me. Other people were different. I'd put the camera down. We'd respectfully knock at the door. They told us to get the fuck out of there, get the fuck out of there. Left. Gave the knock still and said, we introduced ourselves. Hi, we're wondering if you want to say anything. I'm so sorry for your loss. It's a tough time. And then give them the option. And sometimes they'd say, yeah, I want to talk about this. And sometimes they wouldn't. Yeah, so for that aspect, you feel it out. Be respectful. I still think your dignity goes a long way.
100%. You want to be a human being, and those situations are always tough.
But I remember, I remember one story we covered. It was the station fire in Providence, and I think 168 people died.
Yeah.
And then some of the other reporters were hugging these people, and I agree. But I also feel like we have a job to do, and I don't know. But you could do it with dignity and grace and treat people like human beings. But I felt some of these people are disingenuous. Go to a soup kitchen if you really want to be such a humanitarian, and there are other ways to express it. So I think some people lie to themselves. Joel and I talk about that a lot, just the reason you give and the real reason. So some people say, we really want to make an impact. Well, maybe you want to make money, maybe you want attention.
Yeah. What's the real reason there?
The people have talked about it with Sam Bankman-Fried, with it. I really want to give money, effective altruism. Well, maybe you want to camouflage what you were doing. But
now, did you work with Steve Hartman, Steve?
He worked at Evening News. I mean, I'm familiar with him, and I was going to bring up another person at CBS who was similar. I used to feel when I was in TV, it's still the old aphorism that there's no such thing as slow news days, only lazy reporters,
I was one of them. No.
Yeah. And I think that at CBS Sunday Morning, you used to have Charles Kuralt, and he would go on the road, and he'd go to these small towns, and he would find stories that the local paper didn't see. right? And it's
He went on the road so much that eventually they found out he had a whole separate family.
That's true. Like
That is true.
That's not good.
He's this
May you rest in
bald,
peace.
avuncular kind of guy, Wilford Brimley looking type of guy,
Yeah.
and he had a separate family.
But he was great. He was great at what
He was a
did.
terrific storyteller. But so yeah, I think I remember when I started at CBS, I felt like in order to do well, it's kind of like the David Rubenstein, the Carlyle Group says, he often says, like, nobody wins a Nobel Prize by being indifferent or not working hard or not loving what they do. And so I think you have to. And I remember feeling like, dude, like, I'm not new to this. I'm true to this. Like, I like if this were baseball, I like the smell of the grass, crack of the bat, the popcorn. Like, you have to like all these different aspects of it. So yeah, I think you have to train yourself to really love it and like it and enjoy it.
Otherwise, get out of it, right?
Yeah,
Because you're just wasting your time.
Yeah, and there are I listen to podcasts now because it's what I do, and I am definitely not amazed, but there are, I would say, the majority of people who are podcasting, they have no background in media or broadcasting, and it becomes very, to say it politely, it becomes very evident very quickly. Like you have a natural, I could tell you have a natural and like good like energy.
Oh, thank you.
But you've got to bring a presence when you're on camera. It could, there's a lot of different types of presences, but you got to bring something. And I see a lot of people that are, I'm not going to name names, but just the majority of who I watch, I don't find them particularly interesting or their format interesting. So it's very easy to weed that out. Steve and I obviously have an advantage because we have a background in media. So
but I also feel like, it's like when I left TV, I started working with somebody named James Altucher, who wrote a book called Choose Yourself. And that was a phenomenal experience for me. He was incredibly bright. He was really driven. But he had the book Choose Yourself. He wrote a number of interesting books, which the titles are self-evident. But he wrote a book called Choose Yourself.
These are all New York Times bestsellers.
Yeah,
right?
he was a really brilliant
This
guy.
guy's legit. Yeah.
But he wrote a book called Choose Yourself, which was, when he wrote in 2013, it was capturing the zeitgeist of that time. Like the idea that, everybody would be like, I'd like to write a book, but I don't have an agent, or I need this, or I didn't go there, or I'd like to, sing a
Now
song.
everybody can write a book and just send it to Amazon.
You send it to Amazon.
Yeah.
He mentioned, but that even in 2013, like the gatekeepers, have left, and I feel like I noticed this with a lot of my colleagues, and Rob and Joel, you probably noticed it. Like, well, I love true crime. Why don't I start my own podcast? Mm-hmm. I was a producer, and before in TV, there was a degree probably of a caste system, and I didn't resent it. Like, this is an apprenticeship, and eventually you decide that, hey, I have a lot to say, and you go from being more background to foreground. But I think that was definitely a phenomenon that happened, and like Joel said, it's democratized, and you're like, you need a mic, and that has merits and demerits to that. Because the barrier to entry is so low, you're going to have some people who aren't great at it, but that's okay too. I think
we're also in this bubble of influencership that we're not even aware that we're really in. And I just know, I personally know a lot of people, but just broadly, everyone's got a camera, everyone's got an Instagram page, everyone's trying to publish a book. It's just like everyone's kind of doing this,
their own
right?
whiskey or their own vodka.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's got it, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see in the next few years or sooner kind of the wheat separated from the chaff. Is that the correct expression?
Correct. Yes.
So I don't, I think we're in this weird bubble right now where everyone kind of, coming off the pandemic, people started during the pandemic, it's not quite as easy as it looks to do it consistently. It's actually a lot of work.
Talking about a lot of work, I want to know what it's like to get honors in English literature. When I read that, I said, "Gee, where's the knife to put in my eyeball?"
Tommy, did you get honors in English literature?
Absolutely not.
get a
And
B?
I tried to give her the Soprano DVDs that I got on the side to get good grades.
Did you get a C at least? A C?
In English?
A D?
D.
Oh, you passed.
And that was with trying to
All
pay
right.
it
A, B,
off.
C, D,
Yeah,
the top
Whatever.
four. Yeah.
It wasn't any F.
Well, you can code, man. So I was always an English guy, never a math or a science guy ever, but I could always write, could always spell from a young age, and it's weird because I just went to my parent-teacher conference for my kids, and they told me my daughter was the top math student in their class. I was like, you definitely did not get that from her, but it was just...
So early on in life, you had a gift of reading. Could you read quicker than everybody else? Were you able to spell quicker than other kids?
So I went to this freak public high school in New Jersey, small town called Highland Park, New Jersey. Shout out.
I know exactly where that
I
is.
love New Jersey, right next to Rutgers University. And somehow I managed to hang, but it was just some of the smartest people I've ever been around. Just happened to go to this public school. And but I just remember my dad he's a retired physician, but he was an intellectual. He would always read famous books by famous authors. And I remember 7th, 8th grade, he used to sit with me like it wasn't a punishment. It felt like it at the time, but we would read books together like Moby Dick and Mark Twain and stuff. And I hated it at the time, but it taught me a lot, and I learned a lot of words, and nothing
Might have just led you to where you're at today.
It might have. You never know. So I jokingly told my wife I was going to do that. But I'm curious, Steve, are you a big reader? You a big book? Yeah, Steve reads a lot. That's why his IQ is like 200 points higher than mine.
No,
I'm just I'm a workhorse. This guy is.
But I think he said something that I probably would have taken exception to, and I probably would have felt the same way, or you, or anybody. I probably evolved in mindset, right? I mean, everybody always talks if you want to be successful in mindset, and even what Joel said, I probably would check him on it. It's kind of like a lot of people cite the Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck, and she wrote a book on mindset, and it influenced me a lot. Just in the idea of, do you have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? And it's kind of like when you have kids, you tell them you're really hardworking because you can control that rather than you're smart. Or you don't want to tell them attributes that, and if you have a fixed mindset, you're like, well, I'm going to have this job and I'm going to do, and if you have a growth mindset, and I think for us, we want to have a growth mindset and not just be like, we're going to do this. And it's about work and effort, and, fixed mindset, I think, is always looking for approval or affirmation, and a growth mindset looks for development. We just want to be the best we can possibly be. So I think our self-talk has to change in some ways. And it's kind of like what Wayne Dyer would say in, your erogenous zones, where he would say, if you say, well, Tommy, come dancing with me, and you say, well, I'm not a dancer. Well, how do you become one? And start
with the 2-step.
Right. Well, yeah. And I think for you, I think it's good that, as Joel talked about, the democratization of this, or why not? If you're good at this and you have something to offer, who's to tell you can't do this? And I think, and a lot of times when people tell you, they're telling it for their benefit. They want to keep you in that position, or they want to make you think that what they're doing is really, really hard. And, I was listening to somebody talk to somebody, and she was praising somebody for really being an amazing speaker. And she's like, stop praising me for being so exceptional to let yourself off the hook for not doing it. And so there's a lot of different ways to look at things. And I think that, so that was one thing I did want. And I think whenever you have any partnership or relationship, you want to really help people, and you want to complement each other. And I think Joel and I are the same age and similar background, but we do have to stop ourselves from comparing other people or worrying about things, or just constantly being like, when this happens, we'll be happy, or we keep pushing the goalposts. And I think there's a sickness, and I think we have to acknowledge it and recognize that, no, let's do our best and just keep moving, and then seeing where we'll go. I mean, I always like to say, people talk about, well, if you put a plant in a jar, it takes the shape of the jar, but if you put it in a room, maybe it will take the shape of the whole room and you do more than you thought you would do. And so that's what I try and do. You know,
I put a poster over Lamborghini on my wall, and I went to the Lamborghini dealership about 500 times before I could actually. And I said to myself, "I'm gonna get one." And the guy kept. I'll never forget. His name was Walter. He's, "Are you ever gonna buy anything?" Yeah, I'm close. I'm close. And I went back one day, and Walter, motherfucker, I have cash this time, bitch, and I want the Spider.
Wow.
And I just worked like a maniac until I got it.
What color? What color?
Silver.
So you are into visualization. Like
Yeah. So for me, if he would write down, like, say, how to do some type of cutting or software, I'm terrible. But if I see it visually, I got it. I'm a visual all the way.
But he's also talking about goals. So, like, do you, like, conceive, believe, achieve, and all that? Like,
I'm like.
And when did you become like that? Because perhaps if you had this mindset in high school,
yeah, always.
You might have been.
It was only so the way my mind has always worked is if I'm not interested in it, I'm terrible. I mean, absolutely terrible. But if I'm interested, it's like seeing red. I go extreme. You know,
doesn't sleep.
I won't sleep. You know, like when I'll
text
I don't
at
know
3:30, 4 o'clock
solid
in the morning.
year, 5 a.m. to 8 a.m.
So what are your interests besides podcasting? What are you really into?
So coding, like on the computer, SEO, medical. I study medical like crazy, and space.
Space.
Those three things.
You ever listen to Coast to Coast AM?
Oh, I used to listen to him all the time.
I've been listening to that
and
show
then he
for
passed
20
away, my
Yeah,
buddy.
Art Bell died.
Art Bell was the best.
Yeah, Art Bell was the best.
He
Then
did
there's
go a little cuckoo sometimes.
Yeah.
But I loved Art
I've been
Bell.
listening to those guys forever. I go to bed to that stuff. But
Now, when you get a master's degree in education, now when you get out, you know, I don't know about education, but a lot of college, you don't use any of it.
yeah,
Now, when you go for master's, how many years is that? 6?
that was
6?
that was actually just 2 additional years. 2 additional years.
Oh, you got off easy.
Yeah.
You get the master's. You get to say you have a master's degree with
only
two.
two extra years after college. Yeah.
That's not bad.
We were just talking about that on the way up. It was kind of like didn't know what to do, so I went and got another degree, and I taught for a little bit, and realized that was definitely not for me, and that's how I segued into.
But did they teach anything that you like? If you would have stayed that route, was there anything that
First of
you
all,
would have applied? You think in real life?
I learned an interesting lesson about parenthood there, actually. So
I guess you don't want to go now.
Yeah, it's first of all, teaching is the hardest job. Look, my mom's calling. It says surviving the survivor. She knows she can't help herself. She wants to be on air. No, first of all, teaching is the hardest job. There's no harder profession. But I taught in a Head Start program, if you know what that is. It's for disadvantaged children,
cool.
Low socioeconomic. So I was living in New York City in Manhattan, and I taught in the hood in Washington Heights in a place called Washington Heights on Dyckman Street, which is 200th Street in Manhattan. The very first day I went, there was a shooting on the school campus. So there's like
sound like this doesn't sound like
was,
master's degree guy, a little bit extra education.
Put it this way:
the ghetto.
The undercover cop cars on 200th Street in Manhattan are yellow cabs because no real cabs go up there. So the yellow cabs,
or do no cops go up there because they say I'm not going up there for $35K.
It was crazy, but I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I was in charge of this classroom for a year. And I remember like the state assessors came in. But I really loved the kids. It was an awkward situation because it was almost all single moms, no dads, and the moms were young, like as young as me, if not younger, and I was like 22 at the time. So they all would like call me daddy, or like I was like their father figure, which was tough. But I was like, you know what? These kids have no fun in their life, and it's just such a difficult existence. So my classroom was like pandemonium. I would just let them have fun. The other classroom, like we learned, but it was like controlled chaos. Where the other classroom, the teacher made them sit on their hands before they ate, like all this craziness. And when the state assessors came, I thought I was going to get destroyed, and they left, and they were like, everyone should be like this guy's classroom because it let the kids have freedom. And I kind of feel like that in parenting. Like you see parents who are super strict, and I think it has like a backfire effect. Like then the kids want to party. My kids are too young for all this stuff, thank God. But you know, you don't want to be too strict because you don't want your kids to rebel, but it was kind of a life lesson I learned about parenting.
You know, I always use this example that, you know, in Italy, right? When you're 3, you're drinking wine.
Yeah.
Right?
It's crazy.
But if you look at the number of alcoholics in Italy, it's one of the lowest out of all the countries because it's not that forbidden fruit. So when you're 21, it's not like, oh, or 18, or you get to school. Whereas here, if you are, like you're saying, if you're real strict and don't have a drink or don't do this, don't do that, then it's that forbidden fruit. So when you get the opportunity, you do it. Now, I just had my first daughter.
Congrats.
I don't know if this is right or wrong, but if, say she's going to smoke.
You're giving her wine in the crib?
No. Fuck no. No, absolutely not. No, and no.
You just said a 3, right? She's 2. No.
But when she's older, I would hope that if she wanted to experiment with something, I would want her to come to me as her dad and as a friend, and I can, you know, give education on it. And if you're going to do it, you're going to do it. I'd rather you do it like while I'm there, or I know it's not, you know, bad, laced, or whatever. That's just how I
think you're 100% right. I think parents are sometimes too strict, and again, it backfires. I think you've got to just be open and honest and have that kind of relationship. And
or if they mess up,
you
know what I mean? Like, say they got in trouble. Okay, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, yeah. You know what they say, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problem. Rob, you have kids?
Yeah, 2 boys.
How old?
15-year-old and almost 13-year-old.
Those are almost big problems.
Yeah, they're getting there. They're good boys.
They get good.
So now you started with NBC? Is that where it was? That your first?
So my trajectory went from teaching in Washington Heights on Dyckman Street to I applied. I didn't even know what it was. It's called the NBC Page Program, which is like a very storied. Right, Steve-O? It's like
it's a nice way to get in the door. It's kind of like probably William Morris's like mailroom.
Yeah, it's basically like an apprenticeship. You start in the first bunch of weeks, you have to give tours of 30 Rock, and then you can choose little mini internships. So if you're interested in sales, you work in the sales department. If you're interested in true crime, you work for Dateline. It just so happens that when I started in 1996, they instituted So 2,800 people applied for the Page program, I found out. 80 are accepted. So I was one of the 80 accepted.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And then out of the 80, the year that I was there, they took 2 of us, and one they assigned to the president of all of NBC. His name was Bob Wright at the time. And the other worked for the senior vice president of NBC. The guy's name was Tom Rogers, who at the time, you know, seemed like he was 60, but he was really like 38 years old. He was like this wonder kid. And I got assigned to him, and it was the same summer that he was creating MSNBC. So one week he would go, because MSNBC used to be a real joint venture. Now it's not, but it used to be, when it first started, it was a joint venture between Bill Gates and Microsoft and NBC, hence MSNBC. And so...
Oh, the devil, you mean?
Yeah. So I would...
the devil himself.
So
I can prove it.
Yeah, so one week he would be out there meeting with Bill Gates in Redmond, Washington, this guy, Tom Rogers, and then next week they would be in New York. But one week when he went away, I took the liberty of putting his name on my resume, said I worked for him, and I applied to MSNBC before it even was created. And because I had Tom Rogers' name on my resume, they hired me right away. And then when Tom found out, he wanted to be pissed at me, but he was like, this is exactly what I would have done. I'm proud of you. Mm-hmm. And so that's how it all started.
Now, what's that like going into a station that's just opening? You know, you were just doing education in Manhattan, not the greatest area.
Yeah.
You applied to this Page thing for NBC, and next thing you know, you're in the front fort of a brand new station, right?
Yeah.
Coming out MSNBC, what are the obstacles that you have to deal with? What's the headaches? Because it's new, right? It's
it was
staff.
There was a million. So when it first started, the irony is when it first,
as the headache comes back, right?
When it first started, it was actually housed, and you got to know the area, New Jersey, but it was housed in Fort Lee. It was outside New York City, and it was where CNBC was. The irony of all this is that there was a little network back then called America's Talking, which was inside of NBC, and we were next to America's Talking. And America's Talking was run by Roger Ailes, who then became the head of all of Fox News, became the most powerful man in media. So it was kind of ironic because that's where MSNBC, which is the liberal network, started. But the early days, I mean, it's so weird to think back on it because the time has gone like so quickly. But, you know, we had rehearsals in this little dumpy studio. And then one day we were just on the air. And then the summer that MSNBC started, that TWA 800 flight went down. And something else huge happened.
Diana.
Like Princess Diana. I think that was the following year, the following summer. But it was
the TWA one?
TWA is 94, right?
No, I think it was 96.
Oh, okay. Okay, you're right, 96. And
I
then
think it was 96.
And then Diana was 97.
97, and I think, but there was something else that summer, I think. Anyway, so all of a sudden we went from nothing to everything, and
no, it's the TWA one.
Yeah, that was it was TWA Flight 800. What year? It had to be
96.
July 17th, 1996, and we went on air like, you know, July 10th or something. So it happened right away.
And you reported this, right?
Yeah, we were all over the story. And then
what were some of the conspiracies? Remember, there was a gazillion conspiracies.
Yeah, well, there still are. There was a someone claimed, you know, people claimed to have seen like a missile. I don't think there was ever. Was there ever a definitive explanation of what happened? I don't think there was. It says.
I mean, that thing got crushed.
Following a 4-year.
I remember.
They say they concluded an electrical failure ignited fuel vapors, but people tend not to believe this.
Theories that Flight 800 may have been destroyed by a bomb, missile, or meteor have nonetheless lingered.
Yeah, but let me tell you. So then a few months later, we moved into our permanent house, which was I've never seen, no one will ever see a TV studio like this again. This was in Secaucus, New Jersey, which is like in the Meadowlands and like marshland in the middle of nowhere. They have outlet stores. And it was the biggest warehouse I've ever seen that was just open with edit bays and open sets and studios. It was just, did you ever go there?
I've never been there, no.
It was unbelievable, like the amount of money they put into this thing. I was convinced I was going to get cancer and die because they had like, you know, 60 giant sat dishes sizzling every time you go.
When you went into the NBC Page program, going back to, you knew you wanted to be a reporter?
No idea. No, and then I wasn't. I was a producer. I had no idea. And then Jody Applegate, remember
Sure,
her?
yeah, for sure.
Jody Applegate was like going to be like the neck, like she was going to like
Katie Couric.
Yeah, come after Katie Couric. I couldn't think of the word. Come after Katie Couric, and she kind of like, her star never shined that much. But she was kind of a big deal at NBC for a lot of years. And she loved me for some reason. She used to put me on the air, like really with, like for stupid segments. Like we had like the American Wiffle Ball Championship team in, and she'd have me like, you know, try to hit balls off their pitcher or whatever. But that was like my very first taste of ever being on air. And then,
how do you handle a TWA 800? Like when you go there, I mean, this is a massive thing.
Yeah.
You know, like what's the surroundings? What's everybody like? What are you experiencing? Because this is your first big one, right?
Yeah. Well, so that story I actually covered from like from MSNBC. I wasn't like a field producer or a reporter yet, but I covered all these huge stories later on when I went over to Fox News. And
do you have a conclusion to the TWA? What you think happened?
I don't. I really do not. I mean, I am partial a lot of times to believe it, you know, to believing the experts, but I've learned, I think, that I'm a little more cynical than that. So I don't know. I can tell you, I mean, there's a lot of eyewitnesses that saw stuff that night. And
I don't think it was an electrical problem.
Yeah. What do you think it was?
I think a missile hit it.
Yeah.
Maybe by accident.
Yeah.
Or a craft or a drone.
What
who the hell knows?
What do you think about the plane that went down on 9/11 in the field in Shanksville?
Don't get me started. I'll tell you what I think after.
Okay.
That'll turn into the whole thing will be about 9/11 because I had the head of the Secret Service during 9/11 in.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another one where it fell off the chair after that one.
Well, yeah. Well, so I worked at the World. So I went from producing at MSNBC. This is how weird this world is. We were housed at CNBC, even though we were MSNBC, And an executive took a liking to me. He's since passed away. His name was Bob Richbloom. May you rest in peace, Bob. Bob took a liking to me and always wanted to play tennis. And I hated doing stuff with work people just because I like to separate it. But, you know, my Jewish mom's like, you got to go play with him. He's a big deal, blah, 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 blah. So I remember one time I went out
She was smart, though.
Yeah, one time I had to go to his big old house in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I remember playing tennis with him. Anyway, in 1999, he tried to start CNBC, but online, and it was so ahead of its time. It was called WebFN, Financial News, and we were like one of the first streaming websites, and he brought me on to do sales, and I was like, what do I know? Nothing. And we were such like a small operation, but we had offices at 3 World Financial, which was connected to the World Trade Center. Eventually, he's like, I need you as a reporter, and I ended up reporting from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. But the point is, I worked there on 9/11, so that's a story that's super close to home to me, and just remember that day so well. And I was living in Hoboken, and the towers fell, and then I couldn't get into work, and I went home, and then just remembering going back into the city.
Wow.
It happened on a Tuesday, and the New York Stock Exchange opened the following Tuesday, and I just remember the smell. And I used to take a ferry from Hoboken, but that one side of Manhattan was so destroyed from the towers that you had to go in this crazy roundabout way to get to a new drop-off point for the ferry, and just there was National Guardsmen in the street. You remember this, Steve?
Yeah,
and tanks in the streets of Manhattan, and just it smelled like a Coca-Cola can was on fire. I'll never get that
metal,
smell. Yeah,
tinfoily smell.
Yeah, it was gnarly.
Yeah.
So
I mean, to make it quick, I always thought that Bush had something to do with it. I always thought Bush, because I thought he wanted to handle Saddam, which he did, which I think personally was the dumbest move in the world because he had all of them under control. But then we had Cordello in, and he had 3,600 independent engineers go in there, and they all said demolition. All 3,600.
Wow.
Steve Cohen?
Then they got the building plans. Like, okay, engineers, okay, you know, they're looking at the metal, okay.
And who's this guy? I'm sorry.
Michael Cordello.
And what was his role?
So he was, you know, street guy in New York, nailing the drugs in the 80s, the heroin epidemic, then went to DEA, then went to FBI, then went to Secret Service, and then ended up being Secret Service during the 9/11 attack. And then he was the head of that when the attack had happened. He sent the 3,600 engineers in, and then he had gotten the building plans. And every single elevator was changed 3 weeks before 9/11. And they had been changed 6 years prior to that. So why would every single elevator be changed? I didn't even get it. You know, in real time, I'm kind of like, so? And he was like, and then what else did he say? There was one more thing he had said that really had stuck out. I believe his wife had worked in Building 7, and she had happened to have vacation.
Well, that's the building that everyone questions, because it basically had nothing to. Yeah, it wasn't like connected, and it fell so much later, right?
Yeah, I don't know, but his wife had worked in 7, and for whatever reason, she had gotten 2 weeks paid time off. So you connect those 3 dots, and then that guy there, Rick Prado. He was the head of the CIA at the time, and he went into Rumsfeld and Bush 61 days prior to 9/11, and he had said all the cells were quiet, which you obviously know. That means something's going to happen. And it wasn't Bush, it was Rumsfeld that said, not enough information, Rick. And this guy's the legend.
Yeah, and they had a shot on him, too. Remember? They had a shot to take him out.
Yep, they had a shot to take him out.
Before everything.
Everything. So he goes in 61 days, head of the CIA. Then the Secret Service, who is the lead investigator, says 3,600 demolition, elevators changed. They kick him to cold cases, and they get the report that they preferred, I suppose.
Wow. Yeah, you can go down some crazy,
And that wasn't somebody saying it; it was pulled up.
Yeah.
The engineer's report, the building plan, and Rick Prado. You don't even want to question that guy.
Yeah.
Colin, what do you think of these quote unquote conspiracy theories?
Well, he's got the proof.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean that
No.
maybe they just did change the elevators. And Mike did say, he goes, I hope I'm wrong. I hope they just the engineers came up, it fell down, and they changed the elevators. Maybe there was 3 broken, so they decided to change all of them. Yeah. I don't know. Rick goes in, the legend that every CIA guy I have in after him says you had Rick Prado, and I didn't even know he was that big.
Yeah.
He goes in and they tell him to go fuck himself.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not at heart like a conspiracy person.
I just keep an open mind.
Yeah, I think it's key. And I
think that's very important to keep an open mind.
Because I think every conspiracy has some truth to it, or it could. And if you overlook it just because, if you think Alex Jones is a massive conspiracy guy, I'm just using him as an example. Mm-hmm. There's some truth usually to some, and I think if you're going to look into something and make a comment on something and have an opinion, then do a little bit of research and take a little bit from here, a little bit from here, and always have an open mind because, Mike says A, B, C, D, E, but then maybe another investigation comes along with better technology that says A, B, C, D. So you never know.
Yeah, but Alex Jones, man, I covered that story. I did cover was Sandy Hook. I was a investigative reporter at Fox 5 in New York. And I remember we were doing a story in Westchester that day, and they were like, you got to divert up to Connecticut. And we were there for a while, man, and it was, thankfully I wasn't a parent yet because that was tough to stomach. But just being up there and when there's a huge story like that, the media just descends on the town, they take over, and it's just it's like such a conflict in your mind because it's like this like the worst tragedy imaginable, and then you're trying to get information. And I remember, now I can say it, I didn't reveal this for years, but I remember sitting at a little diner up there, just hours after this happened, and I was with my photographer, and I was listening to the guy at the counter next to me. You could tell he's like a regular, and he was a parent. He was a parent of one of the kids that was killed, and he was just a regular, and he didn't know what to do, where to go, and he just went there to get his usual, dinner. I could have gone up to him, but we both decided we weren't even going to, and it would have been, probably, one of the biggest gets in the country because it was the biggest story by far in the country. You get a parent to speak that night, which no one did. Now you're on every channel in the country because you've got the only soundbite, but we were like, there's no way we're doing this, and I'm so glad that we didn't do that. And
then you would have got wrapped up in all that shit. Or you may have.
Yeah.
You may have,
but then you hear a guy like
twisty.
Alex Jones who's like, this didn't really happen, and they're these crisis actors, and it's like there's time and a place for everything, but you've got grieving parents that rubbed me very much the wrong way with him on that, and he's losing all his money, and he kind of deserves to, in my opinion. But
what they sue him for? A ton.
He just filed personal bankruptcy.
Yeah, of course.
I was reading about it. They're going to make it impossible for him to
dodge it.
Yeah, and he's just, he's going to be living a very frugal life. Anytime he gets anything, it's going to be taken by the court.
I think the hardest part with media in general nowadays too is your First Amendment right. Everybody talks about the First Amendment right, and you have your right to your voice and things that you say. And coming from a news background as you guys did, it's so hard that I got out of the news. I've been out of the news for a little while now, but me and Tommy have had this conversation before. He likes to watch Tucker Carlson and shows like that, and that's exactly what I call them. They're opinionated shows, and then there's news. So a reporter that goes out to the field, like I said, and the police tell them 3 people are dead, and then people will say, well, that guy's fake news or this guy's this or that. They're comparing everything because of the show that they're watching. That's an opinionated show, but then you actually have real reporting. And there's sometimes that reporters do Brian Williams had the gunfire. He was in the middle of the gun battle.
Yeah.
Never happened.
He exaggerated a little bit.
That's a bad look. But not all reporters are like, these terrible creatures that are
the cable channels, and Steve can talk about this, they evolved from, so CNN back in the day was news, it was reporting the news. And then I think it started to happen well before Trump. But then when Trump was elected, everything became hyper tribal. and MSNBC leaned in so hard to the left. Fox went the other way. Newsmax emerged. And, people lost sight of the fact that the Tuckers of the world are just Tucker and Rachel Maddow are basically very similar, but just on opposite sides of the political spectrum. I mean, both very smart individuals. I mean, Rachel Maddow is a Rhodes Scholar. Personally, I don't really like either of them, but I worked with Tucker. I mean, he had an office 20 feet from where I had an office. He always wears wears the same pants every day, and they're high waters. They're like 5 inches off the back heel of his shoe. But he's a great broadcaster in the sense that he knows what buttons to press and he knows how to get ratings, but you got to take him for who he is, which is, he's a feather ruffler and an opinion guy. He's not, put it this way, Edward R. Murrow would be twirling around in his grave, but that's what the media has become. It's become like shock value. Yeah.
But you mentioned Edward R. Murrow. Edward R. Murrow did shows called See It Now, and he did celebrity interviews. I'm saying, like, yes. And
which probably for back then was radical, right?
Yeah. Well, George Clooney, like, memorialized him, and I think Good Night and Good Luck. And I think, like, with anything, like, even at 60 Minutes in the late 60s when that came out, that was the first time that they realized you could make money. News used to be a public service. Yeah. So that made it kind of corrupted it to some degree. Like, money will corrupt anything. And you mentioned Alex Jones. I was surprised during that trial. Like, he was making $800,000 a day.
That's insane.
Because you do stuff to get people's attention.
He was going to the Lamborghini dealer every day.
And then when you get, I want to get back to your land folks. But anyway, and so you do stuff to get people's attention. Then when you get the attention, then you sell people stuff with it, so it's been something that's gone for a long time. And, I do think obviously the country's been more polarized. I do try as a consumer or somebody in news, like we're doing what we do, to call balls and strikes in situations. Yeah. Keep an open mind and recognize that not one side has a monopoly on good or bad. And, but you have to call out.
It is
Alex Jones. I mean, like, he's having people go to this these people who lost their children. They have to move tons of times, and they're getting harassed by his followers. And
there used to be the at least the appearance of objective journalism, but now even that is gone. I don't even think that the networks, the majority of the major networks lean definitely to the left, and I think that's why people are having such a hard problem with traditional media. And then Trump came in with the fake news thing. And look, I mean, I think people are smart enough. They've got to figure it out on their own. Like, you're a Tucker fan, and I respect that because some people are Tucker fans.
I like the Tucker Carlson today, the 101.
Yeah, but if you tell a Rachel Maddow fan that you like Tucker right away, they're casting you in a certain light. They don't like you.
They're just idiots then.
Yeah, I mean,
in my opinion,
it happens both ways, right? But I think that's just the world we live in. A
some of it
world.
Is still like the old George Carlin line, like, how come everybody drives faster than me is a lunatic? And everybody drives faster than me is a lunatic, or everybody drives slower than me is a cripple. So I think, like, everybody sees things.
George Carlin was the great.
He was the best, man.
Yeah, I thought Judd Apatow had done a very good documentary on.
Yeah.
How do you get back, though? How do you get a trust back from the public into journalism, into the news industry? Because it's been almost, I feel like, completely and utterly destroyed, that no one believes anything. And then what is true and what is not true? Because I could say, hey, here's a website to go to, Tommy, I found this. And you could say, oh, that's not true. You have to go to my website.
The answer to that.
And then
it's whatever Big Pharma says. Well, they're paying the bills.
Whatever.
Whatever Pfizer says. That's how it goes. It's whatever Gates says. We saw it.
It's. But how do you get that trust?
I don't think you do. I mean, sadly, so you would have two-parter to this answer. I think you get America. America's not. I mean, I joke half jokingly that we're on the verge of a civil war in this country. Mm-hmm. I mean, things were so bad during, like, George Floyd protests, everything going on kind of right around the time when the pandemic broke out, coupled with the pandemic. But I think that sadly, the last time our country was united was 9/11, right? That's everyone had their flags out, everyone was helping each other, and it lasted, a while, and then conspiracies came out about the Iraq War, and then things kind of devolved from there. But to your question, Rob, about, I think the media landscape has changed forever. I mean, traditional media is definitely going to go by the wayside sooner than later. They were saying that when I was starting off. I remember Tom Rogers, that guy I was talking about, who was the executive vice president, was saying that traditional news only has so much time left, and that was 26 years ago, 27 years ago. But now I don't think we're going back, and I think it's going to be like, when you go into a frozen yogurt place and you've got like the 15 or 20 flavors or 21 handles or whatever the hell it's called, and you choose your own yogurt or your own mix of frozen yogurt. That's going to be media from now on. Like, you're just going to go to who you think you can trust. There's a lot of really good independent journalists, and that's why I like things like Substack and those sites are doing well. But I think you're going to pick and choose. You're not going to be delivered. The news will not be delivered the way it always has.
Well, a lot of it is, right? It's people listen to certain things for affirmation, not information, right? They want
to hear what they want to hear.
Right.
So they're going to click around until they hear what they want to hear. Like someone who,
right.
If I say to Rob, you need to gain some weight. Now, Rob will go call 10 people until somebody says, Rob, you don't need to gain weight.
Right. Oh, interesting.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think that's how people are getting with the news. They're just picking one person that's saying what they want to hear, like that the border is okay, or that the gas price is going to come down, blah blah blah. So then they pick whatever which way may be, and then they stick with that, and they bleed that, and then they get brainwashed by that, and then they get everything shoved down.
I was compared to just being a sports fan, right? Like, you will never change me. I'll be a Philadelphia Eagles fan till the day I die. Eagles. And that's my root. That's my passion. That's my, whatever. And I think it's the same thing too. You get, if it's a Fox News, if it's a CNN, if it's the other way, you're not telling a CNN viewer to turn over to Fox. Oh, that station, they lie about everything there, da-da-da-da. And then what do the Fox people say? CNN, never. They lie about everything.
And they're both horrible.
Same thing.
They're both horrible.
They both have their slants.
You had mentioned the stock exchange when you were involved in that. When you look at it now, do you think they're fudging the numbers on the GDP right now?
It's a great question. The short answer is I have no idea.
Opinionated answer.
Yeah, the big answer, I was there when I was, pretty young, and I was covering, U.S. equities. I was covering basically the stock market going up and down. And I just remember, I'm blanking on his Art Cashin. Have you guys ever heard of him?
Oh yeah.
He's like a legend. He's still around. He's still doing it, man. After you know Art Cashin?
Yeah, I've dealt with him.
Yeah, UBS.
Yeah.
Wow.
I used to hang out and talk to him because he was like this. He's got to be close to 80 years old.
I'm surprised he's still around.
Yeah,
good for him.
Yeah. But I would try to ask him what does all this mean? And he's like, he would just say something like, hey, kid, this is what what feeds the media beast or whatever. So I don't know what's going on in corporate America. I don't know what's going on the with the feds, with the Fed, I should say.
Okay, do you think we're in a recession right now?
I honestly don't know enough, but a recession is defined as 2 negative quarters of GDP or 2 quarters of negative GDP, right? So
I remember the last one was
I don't know if
1 point off.
But I know the chairman of Bank of America, I think, just came out this week and said he doesn't expect the economy to be as dire as people were predicting. But then you look right now, speaking to CNN, they're laying off a ton of people. Disney,
I think
ABC.
JP Morgan says a recession this year.
Yeah, Jamie Dimon said some pretty scary stuff. Yeah.
So the Bank of America guy got a briefcase of money.
Yeah,
right?
this is the thing.
He got the knock on the door. Hey, do you like your dog Charles out back? Do you like your other dog? You like your cat?
Yeah.
Take this, and there's a note in there.
Well, let me tell you something. When it comes to that, you definitely got to follow the money. Nothing in the world of finance would surprise me. That's for sure. Because money is just all too powerful, So
one accountant we had in monster. I mean, like his minimum to work with him is just ridiculous. And he had said, always look at the S&P. I don't know why.
Well, it's the indicators. The S&P 500 is the 5 most major stocks in the country, right? So they look at it as
5 or 500.
500, I said, right? 500. But so it's like an average of the of the major companies and how they're doing. So I guess that's like the bellwether. Like that's what people look to.
Yeah, he just said that will tell you everything you need to know.
Yeah, but I'm surprised he didn't say like the Dow 30. So Dow 30 are America's 30 biggest companies essentially. But that's changed too because now it's all big. It used to be like, AT&T or Bell Labs, it was called.
Right.
Like it used to be like
Remember Bell Labs?
Yeah, like these traditional companies, and now it's FANG, right? It's Facebook, Apple, and look at Facebook. Facebook's a disaster.
And you used to see GE all the time. When I was growing up, GE was on.
GE owned NBC. That's when I worked there. Yeah, they owned NBC. So
I even knew that.
And there's I think a guy named Bill Cohen, no relation, wrote a really good book about like GE, like just recently came out, like what happened, to this empire, and it shows you with everything.
What did happen to it?
I mean, I think probably bad management. They probably tried to do too much. They went away from their core competencies, and once Jack Welch left, I mean, he was probably a terrific leader, and then there's a lot of reasons why things fail and change and evolve, and that goes to even what we're doing here. Successful people embrace change, and you adapt. And there's new ways of doing things.
I just watched a really good documentary, the Boeing 737 Plus or whatever the one. And
we had
trying to get it back in flight and all that. Did you see that?
Yeah, we had actually.
That was really an interesting.
What was that on?
Well, the Boeing 737 was just a piece of shit.
It was the Boeing 737 MAX 8.
Oh, yeah.
Max
what
8.
was it on? I'm saying, where did you see it at?
Netflix,
yeah.
We actually had, one of the guys that was killed, so there was 2 plane crashes. One was in Asia and one was in Africa. And they happened 6 months apart, and it was because of a software glitch. And we had... and
they didn't notify the pilots of the software.
I saw this.
Yeah, it was all... They were trying to cover it up because of the money involved, and the planes that were already built and the software systems and all that. But we had the daughter of one of the gentlemen that was killed in one of the crashes, and to this day, she spoke before Parliament because she lives in London, and then she spoke before Congress, but told me like she will not go on. To this day, she won't go on one of those planes and is terrified and blames Boeing and blames the executives. And he said some crazy stuff, the CEO of Boeing.
Well, they took a hell of a hit.
Yeah.
I mean, they're coming back a little bit now, but they went down, and they were at the top.
Yeah. Cohen, you afraid of flying?
No, absolutely not. But I mean...
You sleep on a plane?
I could sleep on a plane.
Yeah, I used to worry about flying, but I can't care anymore.
Like...
Are you afraid of flying?
No,
I don't care.
Whatever.
I hate it.
Yeah.
I mean,
But I think if you look at the odds, right? Like you look back and you're like...
I think of, because I used to drive from here to Pennsylvania once in a while, and I say to myself, 2.5 hours or 20 hours in the car.
It's only 4 hours in a Lamborghini, though.
I don't have it anymore. I don't have it anymore. That was
I want to hear about that.
That's good. I like that.
Because Joel talks about his boxing coach, and he says, like, positive thoughts, positive action. Right? What is it? Positive thoughts, positive action.
Positive thoughts, positive reality.
And I do think there's a degree in that, right? It's kind of like cynicism is what passes for insight among mediocre people, and be positive and deal with things. So, like, in your situation, I'm just curious how that led to it. Like,
so it was, for me, I liked the car, whether it was...
but when did you decide? Who is it that inspired you to say, I need to really believe this, maybe to get my sensory...
It wasn't like that. I was just reading through DuPont magazine, just looking at what came out, and I said, I like that car. I'm going to get it one day. And then I put it up, and I remember somebody saying, how the hell are you going to ever get that? Stuff like, I was in high school. My friends, yeah, right. I said, I'm going to get it. And then I went like a madman for 4 years, and I got it. And everybody else was in college, and I was not.
And let me ask something. When you got it, were you worried, like driving it, like someone's going to hit this thing, or when you would park it, was it a worry, like someone's going to ding this car?
Not at all.
I always wonder about that.
And how long did you have it for?
I had it for 6 months, and I hated it because it was too loud. I had taken it back, traded it in, lost $60K, and got a year newer that was quieter. Because
still a Lambo though.
Still a Lambo. It was an odd year. So the one I had gotten, it was loud, but I thought it was because it was inside, test drive, whatever. But then when I was in it with a girl, you couldn't even talk.
Yeah.
There wasn't any like wah, like a bike, like a motorcycle, like a crotch rocket. It was like, it'd be like, Rob, hey, Rob, can you hear me? Do I turn over here? That kind of shit.
Yeah.
So right back, I went to Walter and I said, get rid of this. Give me the new one. And then the new one was quiet. And that one went, wah, wah.
And you still have it?
No. This was like 2009.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So what are you driving today?
Porsche.
Well, there you go.
Porsche. I like it. Nice, cool, calm, relaxed.
Nice.
There's no substitute.
Cohen
it
drives
was
a Lambo.
Yeah.
But it was motivation, and to just look and expensive as hell, not.
And it fueled you to hear other people
Fueled
say you
me.
weren't going to do
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I liked, like, at the time, what was I built? Oh, I was building. I was burning DVDs.
Wow.
Back then, and you could put the cover on it and everything. So I would go to high school, and at the time, they came out where you could put like the DVD thing in your car.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So now, if you went and picked up a girl and you had all the music videos that you could play on the screen in the car,
Dude.
you had a good shot. So I would go and I'd have every song on DVD, blah, 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 buy 1,000 of them, for a cent a piece. $5. Hey, this is the one right now.
I think I remember Jerry Seinfeld something like had a joke about how we got to the moon because they wanted to meet girls or something. You know what I mean? Like, what motivates you
Yeah.
to do it? But I also think, because Joel and I were talking about it on the way over, that you see a lot of opulence here in Palm Beach, and some people want to live below their means. Some people like a lot of those things, and some people are just like, look, you have one life. I want to have the best things. And you seem to be one of those people, right? Like I was listening to today. I saw an interesting interview with Dana Carvey and Bill Maher, and Dana Carvey was talking about his inability to really, in some cases, buy things for himself. He said, "I bought my nephew a great guitar for his birthday, and I had trouble buying myself like a guitar gift for myself, and I have millions of dollars." So when did you realize that? Like, I think. When?
Yeah. So
I personally am not as financially successful, but I don't think that motivates me. Like, I didn't come from, I didn't come from the background where.
So I guess, how do I explain it? So initially, I liked the car and I had put it up, and then I saw the price, and then I found something that I liked. Like I liked burning the DVDs. I liked being the guy that had something that nobody else could get.
Which is great.
So I enjoyed what I did. And then I took all that capital and expanded it into, I forget what the hell was, it was so long ago. I just kept expanding and expanding. And then when I became successful and was making a good living,
Sure.
I still had that poster and I still wanted it. And I worked at it. But then over time, as I continued to in Pennsylvania, and I had a lot of different businesses, and if I liked it, I was really good, but I knew when to get out. That was one thing I always listened to my instinct. So if my instinct would say, if it was a bad week or a bad month, and I just had this feeling, sell it now while it's popular, I would sell and walk away.
Yeah.
I had 4 bars. I had 4 bars about 6 years ago, and it was a bar and you could vape because they stopped smoking in Florida. So my idea was, okay, well, you can't smoke inside in Florida, but you can vape. So I'll make a bar with a vape shop. And then I had a wholesale warehouse where I was getting the vapor stuff at wholesale. Then I got a letter in the mail that they were going to tax all wholesalers 25%.
Wow.
But only I knew that as a wholesaler. So now when I go to sell to retail stores, I'm going to have to up it. They have to up it. So now who's going to buy a vape that costs more than cigarettes? Because now there's no tagline to say, quit smoking and vape because you'll save money.
Right.
So I sold all 4 bars.
Wow.
In 1 week, sold all 4 of them. My partner didn't want to do it. I had the 51%, gone.
It's still kind of the old Kenny Rogers, know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
Yeah.
And some of it's like an instinct, right?
Right. And then I only get into things that I know I'm into because I know I'm horrible. Like, I can't build a table. Really, I can't put anything together.
Sure.
Nothing.
No.
Ask him. I can't put anything together, period, because it doesn't interest me. I have no interest. But like I was saying, like medical, like COVID, my friend has a lab. I studied that under a microscope, the protein spikes. Like, I could tell where they're at, what they hit, how they do it, how the cells come in, what cells they hit, how it eventually gets to the beta antagonist, shit like that. But then if you would say, Tom, can you build me a workbench? I would say, like what's actually a workbench?
Right.
Really?
But it's aces in their places. You know what you like to do.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. But yeah. No, and I'm not saying it even critically. I think it's great.
Sure.
Yeah. But then, and a lot of people like in this space always ask about failure. How do you handle failure?
Which has happened a gazillion times. I think you have to have $1 million or $2 million and then have 0. And then you understand that money isn't everything. Because at first, like when I was talking about the Lamborghini, at one time I looked at my garage and I had a brand new Bentley, brand new Lamborghini, beautiful house in Pennsylvania, motorcycle, 2 other cars. And I remember in the middle of the night, I went downstairs, depressed, looked in my garage, looked outside, and I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And I realized that I wasn't happy. And then it just had taken losing everything or, losing a relationship, whatever it may be, to realize that didn't make me happy. I achieved all of it, but it didn't make me happy. And what I found later that did make me happy or happier was loving me.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I was so focused, work oriented on no matter what it was, that was it.
And did you always feel like when I get this, I'll be happy? Because I've heard people talk about that a lot, right? Like when I do this, I'm going to be happy. Or when, I'd recommend, I thought the Jonah Hill documentary on his therapist, Phil Stutz, and I thought it was really well done. And he talked about that. I thought it's kind of like wherever you go, you take yourself with you. So he felt like once I won an Oscar or did this or made this amount of money, and he wasn't, and
oddly enough, no, it like I never thought, well, if I get the Lamborghini, I made it. It was what's next? What's next?
Right.
What do I like this next? What am I going to do next? Boom, 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 boom. What is good? And then I made a couple of bad decisions and I went from a Lamborghini and Bentley to a Huffy.
Wow.
And riding a bike in sleet, snow and rain to the post office to mail whatever I could get cheap and flip it for months to get capital.
And you hear that all the time. I hear, these crazy successful people that have all this money and they're like, I think we had someone in there. I can't remember who we had in. Who the fuck did we have in? I can't remember who we had in. They were talking about money. They had a lot of money. And they're like, it doesn't really make me happy. I mean, it helps. Money helps with anything. It didn't make me happy. And then you look at it and you're like, everybody, I don't know, is at different stages in their life. Maybe being successful is graduating from college.
Sure.
And getting a job somewhere.
It was Noah. It was the accountant that we were referring to. And what had happened was, he was raised just normal. His father was a forensic accountant. At an early age, one thing that stuck out that he had said to me, he realized that money could buy more than a can of soda.
Right.
He's an older guy, And at first, he thought that money was everything too.
Right.
So now later in life, he's very, very successful. And I had asked him, I said, what's your favorite day of the week? What's the favorite day of the week with the business, whatever. Right. And he said, Wednesday. And I said, why Wednesday? And he goes, because every Wednesday I spend the entire day with my wife and my kids.
Wow. Yeah, of course, right? Yeah.
But in the beginning, for 50 years of his life, it was, I realized that money can buy a lot more than just a soda. But then at some point, he realized that that's not everything.
No, and I think it's like, Scott Galloway, the NYU professor, wrote a book called The Algebra of Happiness, and he was saying...
That was a good book.
Yeah, he was... saying a lot of those things that are often said where people's deathbed, they're not saying, obviously, I wish I would have worked more, or, but they talk about their collective memories of like, remember when we went to the Vatican or we went on that cruise, and those are usually the memories collectively. But I think he said, I forget who he quoted, but it was something like success or whatever is not having fear, right? Like money gives you, a sense of that, you have fewer things to kind of worry about, and
it gives you security.
Yeah. But I think Joel and I were actually talking about that, and that was one of the things that I've enjoyed about working with Joel and becoming closer with him, is we try and help each other navigate just life, right? And managing life and recognizing that, no matter what the situation is, you could always say like, well, when this happens, if it wasn't for this, I'd feel great, and I think obviously you have to learn how, like, there's always going to be something, I thought in that Phil Stutz documentary, he talked about the certainties in life are that you're going to have to work, you're going to have pain inevitably, and you're going to feel, you're going to have uncertainty. And we all have to deal with a degree of uncertainty,
See, and for me, I guess throughout, my life so far, I'm not into going on vacation for a week. I'm not into going on a yacht for a week. I'm not into going to go see, I mean, this sounds bad, but I'm just not into going to see family for a week.
Right. Sure.
I want to go fly in, hi, how you doing, stay the next day, and home.
Yeah,
in and out.
I agree.
Because I enjoy working. Like, if I wasn't working, I lose my mind.
Right.
That's just how
And
I'm
I've
built.
heard people say, they were like, we have all this money, and, you mentioned Joe Rogan. He doesn't need to work, but people do it for the love of the game. They really enjoy it. And I think that's great. And that's also, people make the erroneous assertion that money is equivalent, is just enough. And people need a sense of purpose, like they're interacting with people, that they're satiating curiosity. And so, yeah.
I always take it back to, like, everything I think in life is, if you can see the world, and this sounds like so cliche, if you can see the world through the eyes of a kid.
Yeah.
Right?
Agreed.
You go back to when you were a kid, and I can still remember the memories running around with my cousins at my grandmother's house.
Yeah.
I don't remember my dad. I mean, I remember, but what was the most expensive toy or the most expensive thing or the money that I got? Those were great. I had the Sega Genesis and all this type of stuff, but it was the memories that I made with, and I still, to this day, I could tell you exactly playing here, doing this and doing that, and they'll never get taken away from me.
Right.
The Sega Genesis is somewhere trashed. I don't know where the hell it's at. Who knows, right? So and everybody's different, right? But the stories that always are amazing to me are the people that say, you have to fail, I think, in life too.
Yeah.
Because if you don't fail, you don't learn.
Have to fail.
And you see it now with sports. They got all these super teams and all this stuff. These kids go from a youth organization to a stacked team that wins. They never lose. Then they go to high school. They go to the best high school team that stacked all these kids together. They never lose. Now they're on to college. Well, now you got all these power things going on, conferences, this moving, this, and there. Can they mentally handle when they lose? And it's hard, and you have to know how to handle it. And that's why sometimes I'm like, you know what? My young kids would coach them in football. Like, yeah, I hate losing too, but guess what? You're going to learn now from this experience. How did you get your ass kicked? What did they do? How did they beat us?
And I always say this to you. My grandfather was tough. And when I was a kid, I was like, oh, man, here he is again. And I would have to catch 100 balls, footballs, in a wife beater. When it was 2 degrees, 5 degrees, I'd have to hit 100 foul shots. When I was boxing, I had a box with no headgear. There was things with him. If it was 110 degrees out, 3 sweatshirts, 3 sweatpants. But I broke every record in Pennsylvania as a running back. I got 4 golden gloves.
Amazing.
Because he was very old school, and you start something, you finish it. It didn't matter if it was cold. And the reason I didn't realize it at the time, and even in high school. But when everybody wanted those little heat warmers on their hands, I was like, this is a joke. Really?
Wow.
Heat warmers? I was just out in a wife beater for 5 years.
Wow.
And when everybody's sweating to death, I'm like, I don't have 4 sweatshirts on. All I got is pads. This is nothing. And when I think back to that drive and having to go through that, finish it, get the edge on someone, and whatever it may be, I think it's a big, driving force in my drive. But at the same time, I don't do things I know I'm not good at. I stay away from things I know I'm not.
No, I think it's smart.
I'm of no service.
And I also think some people are very successful think they could do anything. You saw that in Pennsylvania, and whether or not you like Dr. Oz or not, like just some people who are successful in one area of life, they think it can carry on to every other area.
All right, so now you want an Emmy. We're kind of fast forwarding a little bit because you're a little bit on a time constraint. So you wanted an Emmy, right? And you went out there and you were at the place where they have the frog DMT. Right?
Well,
that's what the frog DMT's out there, right?
In Arizona?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's Pinal County. I won an Emmy for it's a wild story. We were chasing with my photographer Alfonso, one of the best photographers I ever worked with. We got assigned to do a story chasing drug runners through the Sonoran Desert in Arizona. I'd become friends with this guy whose name is slipping my mind. He was all over the news for a while. He was the sheriff of Pinal County, which is just north of Tucson, which is in Pima County. And he let me do a ride-along with him. I don't know if I ever told you the story. No. And so we go out, we meet up at like midnight with all these Pinal County sheriff's deputies. And long story short, we're out there for like
Were you like Bryan Cranston when he went with Hank?
The picture of Breaking Bad, yeah. So
he cleaned up pretty good from being in that lab all that time.
Hey, and that picture right there with Bryan Cranston. First of all, it's Andrea Mitchell over his shoulder, is a famous NBC correspondent. But I FaceTimed my daughter, and he talked to my daughter for a while. He was super cool. By the way, the guy over there is Ryan Zinke. He was the Secretary of the Interior. He is a Navy SEAL. That dude right there has the biggest hand I've ever seen. Look at the size of his hand.
Wow.
Look
Massive.
at his fist. Fist is as big as your head.
He's from Montana. He was the only congressman, I think, in Montana because they only have one representative.
Or they were afraid of him.
Yeah. I go to his office. He starts pulling out every year that you're a SEAL, they pull out, they give you a knife. So he was a SEAL for
like
21 years.
Like, see his hands and say...
you shake his hand. It's just like your hand.
Hey, Joel, I know you're Mr. News guy of the world, but look at what you're dealing with.
He started showing me stuff from Saddam's palace. It was kind of crazy. Yeah, he was an interesting dude. But what were you just talking about?
About your Emmy. And smugglers.
So I go out with...
Tell me about all that. Because I have... Marikovich is coming in February, and I can't wait. How do you get close to these people?
So I was friendly with this sheriff, and then they offered to let us do a ride along, and we go and we meet these crazy badass deputies who are, they're brave guys, man. They go out in the middle of the night, got their like long arms on them, firearms, and sure as the day is long, we're out there for like an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and you just start seeing stuff. They've got like their night vision goggles on. Next thing you know, we're in like all these crazy pursuits. They caught like 10 smugglers that night. I forget the exact number, but number one, I remember being frozen because you think the desert, but at night it's like relentless. So it's so cold, man. This is like probably the middle of the winter, early spring, and they just are running after them. They hide in these like cotton fields, and it's like you feel like you're in this weird like Matrix movie. Like you get like it's all trippy and weird. It's at night. You're running around. Lights are flashing.
How dangerous? Like what's the danger?
Very dangerous.
It's very dangerous
because these guys are all carrying arms, so it's like they can fire back, and you don't know. So we're like in flak jackets with like the real deal. But
what were they smuggling? What kind of drugs?
Cocaine? I believe
Mostly
it's cocaine and marijuana. Big, just like you see on TV, like the big bales. I think this was marijuana, actually, not cocaine. But for some reason, I remember this. I don't know why. So one of the tricks to to being a good writer in television is writing to video, and a lot of people don't do that, but I kind of take pride in doing that. And at the very end, so finally the sun comes up, and you see all the guys they apprehended. They're just like sitting in a circle. They're all handcuffed, and they let the dog out during the daylight to go find like the rest of the drugs. And this dog found, it was a police dog, found like a few more bales. And you could tell he was so proud. The handler was like, "Yay, Buddy," or whatever the dog's name was. And then Buddy, just like alpha male dog, lifts his hind leg and takes a leak right on the drugs. Like he marked his spot. Wow. I remember ending my story with, I forget, I had some funny line. But
it would have been funny if the dog would have like cut it with his claws and took a little gagger. And the dog's running around. Dog, you got to come back. We need you to find more.
Yeah, it was an interesting story. But those guys, man, it's like it's the Wild West out there. We did a lot of stories on the border out there.
Did you notice that the drugs coming into America were a lot different than other countries? Or had you been told that, or had you heard that at all?
Coming in through Mexico, you mean?
Yeah.
In what sense?
So, we had Roger Reeves in, and he got caught with 30 tons of marijuana multiple times. Yeah, he got in life, but he got out on COVID relief. And he had one of the nicest guys I've ever met. You know, how funny was that?
He was good. I liked him.
He was the pilot for Escobar, right?
Yeah, but but no violence. He wasn't into the violence.
It's funny. We had a drug runner on our show named Luis Navia who worked for Escobar, and he was probably the sweetest guy you ever meet.
Oh, this guy was.
If you didn't know, you'd think he was a Jewish accountant. This guy. Clean cut.
You would think that this guy is just like the guy from the South. How you doing there, Joel and Steve?
Yeah.
So they're making moonshine.
Yeah.
And, he went to be a pilot, to try to get out of the boonies, right? And this was, 60s, back then. So somebody comes up to him, blah, 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 blah. Hey, do you think you could fly, 20 pounds of marijuana to Arizona? Okay, how much? $5,000. He goes back to his mom and he goes, "Mom, I talked to the lawyer, and the lawyer said, worst case probation. I can get $5,000 if I fly this to Arizona." His mom goes, "Son, you need a co-pilot?" Yeah. We were dying. And, it just escalated. And oddly enough, Arkansas happened to be more to drop off in Arkansas and some other states that I think you could put two and two together. For some reason, Arkansas was $50,000. Everywhere else was $5,000 to drop off a load. But he had said that the marijuana, and sometimes he was moving coke, but primarily marijuana, it was different to the United States than the other one. They put more addictive shit in for it to come here.
Yeah. Well, now drugs are super scary with all this fentanyl. Yeah. Covered that. Remember, there was a story maybe a year ago about there were football players from, I want to say, where were they from? You know where they were from? They were from West Point, of all places. There were a few football players that were in Fort Lauderdale on spring break, played for West Point, which is the Army, and at least 2 or 3 of them OD'd on fentanyl. I think maybe one of them died, but it's scary, man.
I was hoping you were going to tell me that you took that toad DNA.
No, but I did interview Mike Tyson about a year. So Mike Tyson's big into psychedelics now. Yeah.
He's smart.
Yeah, he's a very smart guy. And there's a psychedelics conference in Miami now. I'm intrigued by it because it's supposed to, for guys like me and Steve Cohen with anxiety issues.
I have it too.
It's supposed to really help, man. I had this guy on my podcast. His name is Daniel Carcillo, Carbomb. He lives up here your way. You should get him on. And he was a 2-time Stanley Cup winner with the Flyers.
I knew the name.
Yeah.
I heard the name.
I think it's
Dan Carbomb Carcillo. Yeah. And
is it Blackhawks though?
No,
Blackhawks.
I think he played. He might have won the cup with the Blackhawks, but he played for the Flyers.
Yeah.
So he was an enforcer in the league, which is kind of weird because you see him. He's not a big dude, but my first question to him was, "Would you take Mike Tyson in a fight?" And he said, "On the ice every day of the week, but on land he'd get killed." But he was in like 197 fights in his career. He's a young guy. He's only 36 now, but he suffered like traumatic brain injury, was suicidal, was having all kinds of major issues, and he decided to go down the psychedelics road. And 6 months after he started taking it, like microdosing, his scans were all clear, and he's now started a company called Wisana Health, and Mike Tyson's like the biggest investor. But yeah, Tyson's really into it, man. Really. By the way, Tyson's like one of the sweetest guys. I know it sounds crazy because you think of like the savage
history.
Yeah,
like, I've never heard.
He's a big reader, man. He's an interesting character. But yeah, I interviewed him at the Psychedelics conference, and he was talking about how much it's really changed his life.
Yeah, well, microdosing has become huge.
Yeah.
You know, it's become really, they're even talking about it mainstream.
Yeah.
Which I still don't understand.
I think they're going to legalize it at some point.
Portland and Colorado, you can get it.
My boxing guy, back to the great Josh Dempsey, says, go to a doctor, you die. What does he say? How's it go? I forget. You go to I forget what it, but it's something like you go to a doctor, you die. You go to the earth and something, whatever rhymes with die. Yeah. He's like, he believes in everything coming from the earth.
You go to the doctor, you die. You go to the earth, you get high.
Yeah. Basically, that's a good variation on it. Yeah.
So now how does the Fox News job come about?
So that's interesting.
And then that led that you covered the 2016 presidential election, right?
Yeah.
With all that.
Yeah.
That must have been a freaking.
That was interesting.
That
was interesting. So I was hired. So just take a half step back. So I was working in Arizona, and you guys remember Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords gets shot. And I was one of the first reporters. I think the first reporter at the hospital when that happened.
Can you pull that top up?
Yeah. And so that got me a lot of like national exposure because it was a massive story, and I happened to be working there. It happened on a Saturday. I was at the gym. They're like, it's a huge deal. We think a congressperson was shot. Get down there. So
Joel, I'm sorry to interrupt you. So let me ask you this. So when you go from, like a flight crash, major flight crash, right?
Yeah.
Then a family loses a loved one,
mm-hmm.
then, your normal catastrophe, and then to a congresswoman.
Yeah.
What is, we went through like the crash and how that is, how hard it is with families, your everyday stuff that you're reporting on that you yourself, I'm sure at times are like, what a sick individual.
Yeah.
And then you go to something like this. What is the scenery when you're talking a congresswoman?
Well, you know that this is going to be a massive story
and
once it starts to unfold.
Right?
Yeah, and you can't mess up. I mean, this is, one of X amount of Congress. How many Congress people are there in America?
435.
435.
Damn. You just ripped it right off the top.
That's why.
All right, Steve.
That's why I turned to Rain Man over here.
Okay, he is Rain Man over here.
Funny.
So
that was a great movie.
Yeah.
Steve Cohen coming through in the clutch.
Well, I was thinking about earlier when you were talking about flights, like, are you afraid to fly? Qantas never crashed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah. So it's a huge story, and you just cover it, and I was on it from day one. The thing about the difference between local news and the networks come down with people like Steve Cohen, but not nearly as good, and they're not on the ground really. They come and they use their phones, like they're on the phone the whole time, on Instagram and Facebook. I don't even think Instagram existed back then, but they're looking for family members that way, where in local news, like, you've already got contacts. I knew people in the neighborhood that led me from one thing to the next. So every night I had a big get. I'd have like the shooter's parents, or I would have the shooter's ex-girlfriend, or I would have someone that was tight with the congresswoman. And then eventually, she made it through the worst of it and was sent to Houston for rehab, and I was sent there. And then I got a lot of exposure, and that's how I ended up getting hired at TV News. Is a weird game because I actually was hired by ABC News, and then the person who hired me was let go. It's such a fickle business. So that was the difference between me becoming an ABC News correspondent and then a Fox News guy. And so I was hired locally at Fox News as an investigative reporter, which I didn't really have credentials for, but they thought I, could handle. And then from there,
and then when they label you as an investigative reporter, for someone who's listening, because there's this reporter, that reporter, this reporter, that reporter, what is it, an investigative reporter?
So there's like kind of a beat reporter that's an everyday, goes out, you cover the fires, you cover the stabbing, you cover the,
So a beat reporter, he's in the field.
He's in the field covering the day-to-day news. And then
what's a field reporter?
And that's a field reporter.
Field reporter and beat reporter are the same thing.
In local news, depending on the station, but for the most part, there used to be beats, so you'd cover like City Hall or you'd cover this. Yeah. Now pretty much everyone covers everything. But in New York, they had an investigative unit of 2 reporters and some photographers and editors, and I was one of the 2, and we would do exactly that, like investigative stories. So the big story we broke when I was there was we got an inside tip from a whistleblower at the Westchester County Airport, which at the time, which was where President Obama would fly in and out of. Not a huge New York airport, probably the 4th biggest, but a lot of commercial flights go in and out. And someone on the inside who worked in the control tower said, look, you're not supposed to bring computers and phones in here. It's prohibited. They were bringing computers and phones, and they were sleeping on the job. So planes were coming in and out, and he would get video of for us of guys literally asleep at the wheel inside the control tower while planes are landing. Scary, really scary. And for some reason, the story didn't, like, no pun intended, didn't take off the way the news director thought it would. But it was
the airline probably said, look, you better bury that or we're pulling all our commercials, buddy.
Well, it's interesting. So the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, so this guy was a whistleblower and basically came out, and they really did their best to cover it up, to not let the public know. So that was an interesting story in and of itself.
Now, how frustrating is that for you as a reporter?
It's pretty frustrating because it's like going up a down escalator. Like, you've got access to like something that's, is legit, because this guy is literally, first of all, he wouldn't go on with his face. We had to disguise his voice. It got to the point that we had to distort it so much because there was a fear that the federal government would reverse engineer the editing and figure out exactly who the guy was. So we had to go through like multiple layers of pixelating him and distorting his voice so the federal government wouldn't try to retaliate. I don't even know whatever ended up happening to the guy. It was a huge story. I mean, we went from that to, the one that got all the attention was...
Can't wait to hear this.
Yeah, we did a undercover story about food, like the street vendors in New York.
Oh, jeez.
And we would follow like hot dog vendors next to Rockefeller Center. We got one guy blowing his nose into a tissue and then taking the tissue and wiping off the hot dog. And then we would bust out and come up to the guy who just ate that hot dog, and he would gag and almost vomit. We would show him the video. He'd double over the garbage can.
Right.
The most disgusting stuff you've ever seen. And
wait a minute. So
got all the attention.
So you bury a whistleblower's story.
We didn't bury it. We aired it.
I know. They buried it.
Yeah.
For a hot dog, basically, right?
The hot dog story got all the attention.
Interesting.
The dirty food vendors in New York, which is really no surprise. But
I know you guys got like 5 minutes, so I want to get one more for each of you, and then you got to come back.
Yeah.
I got a ton.
As Steve Cohen says, repeat customers are our best customers.
Yeah,
exactly.
I got a ton to ask, especially about some UFO stuff, but we don't have time.
No.
So in your career, what was the most struggling time that you had to fight through? So those people watching, they want to be a journalist, and right now, journalism, I wouldn't think that would be a number one job pick right now.
Yeah.
But if that's your love, right, you should still go for it.
Yeah. So my advice,
maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe just go to podcasting.
Yeah. Ironically, the biggest letdown was quote unquote making it. Like, I always wanted to get to the network, and when I got there, it was like the least fulfilled I was. Like, I didn't appreciate the time I had in Tucson or the time I had in West Palm Beach. Because when you're like a young cub reporter, it's kind of like being in a fraternity house. Like, you're buddies with everybody at the station. You go out, you have drinks. You're not married. A lot, most aren't. You're young, you're carefree. And then I always wanted to make it to the network. And then I got to the network, and what people don't really realize is the network is much more of an office job than it is a reporting job. So I would spend a lot of my time just covering politics because I was in D.C. And because of the way technology is today, you don't even have to actually be at a hearing necessarily. You can a lot of people are just watching hearings on a monitor at their desk at Fox News channels. So I was used to being in the middle of like the action, Gabby Giffords is shot. All of a sudden, there's a huge media gaggle. You're running around. You're trying to get people to talk. Now I'm in this very sterile city, Washington, D.C., and I'm sitting in a very, like, an office, like just like a typical office building, you know, where there's a chiropractor on the 5th floor and Fox News is on the 4th floor. And it was a very weird transition, but you're kind of like a fireman in a firehouse. You're just kind of covering the daily news from the comfort of your desk. But then I covered every breaking news story for like 4 years, including the presidential campaign. So
how many therapists do you have?
Yeah. No, so I was on the road. Like, that's what the reason I couldn't really keep doing it. I mean, there were other reasons, but, you know, I was on the road constantly. Like, there was a terror attack in San Bernardino. Within 2 hours, I'm on a flight cross country, and you gotta, you know, you're throwing stuff in a duffel bag and you're going. Or there was a shooting.
In 2 weeks when you come back, I got a lot to ask you about that. Because I have a lot of questions personally about that.
Yeah, that one. I covered the church shooting. I mean, I covered, you know, 30 major breaking news stories. The Orlando Pulse nightclub shit. The list goes on.
I had to pick like 5, you know, to ask you, because you know, it would just be that.
Yeah, so we would just go, and I was on a unit where we were doing like reporting for the affiliates. So I would talk to all the Fox stations across the country. So I would go from, hey, this is San Francisco. We've got our national correspondent, Joel Waldman, to Orlando, to Philly, to, you know, and I would sit there and report for like 14 straight hours, just going and going and going. It was a really tough job.
Like
so
hurricane coverage.
So yeah, but it's kind of a cautionary tale to be careful what you wish for, because sometimes it's not always like what it's cracked up to be. That was the least fun of all the jobs, but if you're young, my advice is go for it. Like, I didn't know that I could be a reporter. I didn't know like that was even a real option, and I started really late. So I didn't start reporting till I was like 35 years old. But I would say if you're into it and that's what you want to do, just go for it.
And then when you see all the changes, you know, like whether CNN, MSNBC, Fox, you know, you have Tucker with all the blue thing, then you have Hannity, all the blue thing, all these lights and shit. Is that really there, or is it all green screen? Is that glass desk in 7 different places with the blue lighting under it, with the bullshit background? The background's bullshit, I know, but is that big ass glass thing there and all the blue? That's all there.
So
that's
Tucker, I used to do so I would have to do every day. I would do 2 reports for the noon news for all the Fox stations, and then the afternoon and evening news. And I would tape my what they call look lives out of Tucker's studio. So I can vouch for a fact. Him and Brett Baer have real studios. They do use a lot of green screen technology now for like the smaller sets, but Tucker and Sean Hannity are all on, you know, real legit sets. And then
that's a real table.
Yeah, it's a real table. It's as real as this table, right? Yeah. So,
and Steve, in your legendary career, what was your favorite, one of the favorite times?
I agree with Joel. I mean, I think that, I enjoyed being at the CBS Early Show. I definitely enjoyed that. I enjoyed being in radio. You know, we mentioned, I think I found things to enjoy about everywhere you were. And I remember everywhere I was. And I do think, obviously, there's a season in everybody's life for certain situations. And I liked the CBS Early Show. I thought that was fun. I was younger. You were around a lot of young people. You were around a lot of attractive people. You're seeing things for the first time. I think when I was in radio, I probably was a little bit restless. And I think, you know, but I progressed. I went from local radio to network TV. And then I went to local TV. And I felt like that had pluses and minuses too, I think. I think some people have a hard time when you're at network. You have expense account. You could, you know, you can go where you want to go, and you know, it's a little bit different. I thought, you know, local, for example, was a lot more unions, and you couldn't do as much as you wanted to do, or you were just. I think there was a sense of common purpose at network that you don't have. Like, it seemed like it was more of a career at a network place for me than it was a job. Like, you were really interested in getting the story or competing, in this case with Today Show or Good Morning America. And so there was a different kind of energy there. But I think you still like the adrenaline of the big story whatever it was.
What was the first big story that you were a part of? The first big one that you were a part of, where you said to yourself, "Wow, I'm a part of this." Whichever way, how you were a part of it, you were a part of it.
I mean, I remember going out to TWA Flight 800 when I went with Darlene Rodriguez, and she was a reporter from the Bronx, and we drove out there, and I grew up in Long Island, and I remember we drove out there to just see where things were, and she was yelling at me saying, "Can't you drive? Aren't you from Long Island?" And I said, "Why don't you drive? You were hot wiring cars at 16." Because she was from the Bronx. And I just remember giving her a hard time. But we had a good time on those kind of stories. And I remember when Princess Diana died. I remember when Tyson bit Holifield's ear. And, you know, talking about boxing. I mean, I was always very effective at that situation. Like, I was able to zone in. And like Joel says, like, yeah, a lot of times you're doing it from an office. But I was pretty effective on those situations. And I remember, you know, when Princess Diana died, even though it was radio, and we wound up winning awards for that, it was Labor Day weekend and people were off. And a lot of people felt like, people fell asleep at the wheel. Like, it was Labor Day weekend and people weren't there. And I was there. I was ready. You know, I was working in radio overnight. And, you know, I think that's part of it, right? Like, that's still when people say, oh, heroism or like exceptional things are when ordinary people place in extraordinary situations, or when luck is when preparation meets opportunity and you're there. And so, but yeah, I think you have to be ready and just do your best. But I obviously I was supposed to go I had an interview scheduled with ABC Good Morning America on 9/11. So I was in my office at ABC Radio and I was watching Diane Sawyer and Charlie Gibson. I was like, oh, I should be aware of that show that day. And I remember at 8:40, at 8:50 that happened. And I was kind of an executive at ABC and I was in charge of like their news planning. And I had to kind of honcho the stuff until everybody else got there later. And I remember thinking, whoa, is it Wall Street Center's burning, and was it an accident? And then everybody thought when the second plane hit. And I remember in February of 2001, I had been at this convention that the Chicago Tribune put, and it was, you know, all these people on, terrorism. And I remember I was kind of paying attention, but it was kind of a junket. And I remember I dealt with a lot of those people, you know, that you would see all the time because they were there. And I remember I called Jerry Hauer, who was, you know, in charge of like New York City, and he had said, guys, you know, if somebody wants to, before somebody used to hijack a plane, now if somebody wants to, you know, fly a plane into a building, they're going to do it. And so I remember we were kind of really, that was like the beginning of that story. And so, like Joel said, yeah, it was crazy time and you just couldn't believe it. But
it's weird to reminisce because time has flown by, but it's been a minute since that happened, but it feels like yesterday, but time has in fact passed.
And the one that sticks out with you is the judge, right?
I got three. I got the Kids for Cash scheme in Pennsylvania. Judges put away kids to juvenile detention center, and it was a big national news story. They went down.
You remember that
30
one?
years. 30 years in prison. The one judge got 16 years. The other one got.
What were they doing?
Basically, they had a friend who had a juvenile detention center. So your kid would get caught on campus or on school property smoking a cigarette. So the parents, you know, any parent, that's bad, Johnny, and then he'd get taken to the judge, and the judge would be like, you know, I'm going to teach him a lesson. He'll never do this again. Like, great. You know, we're going to put him in juvenile detention for a week. So they put him in there for a week. Well, a week would turn into 4 months, which would turn into 6 months, and they'd get all kickbacks because the money coming in, and they went down. That one was big.
Wow. I never heard of that.
I made Netflix for that. I was on the documentary.
Oh, wow. What's the doc called?
It's Kids for Cash.
Wow.
And then
wow, that's crazy. I mean, it's kind of like that old rap song, right? Like, that's what people do for money, right? Like,
Imagine that. Your kid's smoking a cigarette, and you're that dirty judge that takes away that kid's life for 10 years and ruins them.
Unbelievable.
And the other,
so that you can make money.
Yeah.
the only other two were and these are just funny stories. They're quick. They got to go. My birthday so many years ago, January 7th, I said Notre Dame's going to make to the national title game. I'm a big Notre Dame fan. Beginning of the year, I said it. And they did, and I got to cover the game. I was on the field, so that was like one of the most amazing experiences. But they got crushed by Alabama. So and when President Trump had announced his presidency, Ben Carson was backing Trump. I think Ben Carson had pulled out of the race at this point. So we got sent to Mar-a-Lago early morning, like 3 o'clock in the morning. I had to set up the live truck. And when you bring your gear in, you have to get it swept because they don't make sure there's no bombs or anything like that. So you go past the security point, and that's it. So I get past the security point. My gear's already been checked. They check my gear. Now I'm past the security point, and I had to piss so bad.
I never heard of this.
And I'm like, oh, fuck. I'm like, I can't. Like, I'm literally going to piss my pants. There's no other way.
Yeah.
And I go down, and there's, I guess, a Secret Service guy. I don't know who he was. He couldn't have been Secret Service because he wasn't president yet, but a security, whoever it was. And I'm like, I have to go to the bathroom really bad. And the guy's like, oh, quick, right there. And he pointed just down this hallway. We're in a ballroom in Mar-a-Lago. He points right there. I'm like, oh. And I go into the bathroom, and I just, of course, let it out. And the gold sinks in there and gold toilets.
That's what I was going to ask you.
So, yeah. I think I snapped the picture.
We drove by Mar-a-Lago today.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
a romantic drive-by, Steve.
Exactly. It's a real mandate.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for coming. We have a lot more to go over.
Yeah.
So let's schedule another one.
Absolutely. We'll come
This
back.
is great.
Repeat customers are the best customers.
Yes,
Steve and I will be
exactly.
back.
You guys are both in Miami, right?
Yep. Miami. Steve's a little further
come
north
down a
and
lot,
New
but
York.
Yeah, I live
In the
New York.
area.
Yeah, we're close enough.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Well, thank you guys
Thank
so
you
much.
very
Thank
much.
you,
You're a great
thank you.
host.
Very interesting.
Thanks.
We
Thank
got a
you
lot
both.
more.
All right, man. Appreciate it.
And pull up Joel's podcast and his Twitter too, please.
Surviving the Survivor. Everywhere you podcasts are found. Surviving the Survivor.
And then we
And
have
that's our YouTube page. Also, everything is Surviving the Survivor.
Everything's there, right?
Yeah. Next time I'll bring my mom in too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She makes Cohen look.
Yeah, exactly.
She'll blow Cohen out of here.
And then we'll hit the other ones when you guys come back.
Awesome.
So
Thanks
we
so
don't
much for
make you
having
wait.
us. Man.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
so much.
Thank you,
It was
Steve.
amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.